Listen, not to me, but to the slow percussion of deep time, the basalt heartbeat under mountains, the sibilant hymn of sand moving across millennia, the long inhale of oceans and the longer exhale of ice. Before there were kings or calendars, before ink learned to walk across skin, the planet wrote its own story with pressure and fire. Granite was its grammar, rivers were its run-on sentences, lightning made the revisions. We enter that story not as historians, keepers of neat shelves and tidy dates, but as scavengers in a library that has been flooded, burned and rebuilt on the same foundation 1,000 times. The earth is an archive with missing spines, a registry whose index has been chewed by salt and seasons. Pages are shredded by earthquakes and bound again by lava. Footnotes become fossils. Whole chapters are erased by glaciers with a blue rubber eraser 3 continents wide. What survives are not complete narratives but artifacts of emphasis. A dent here, a layer there, soot and pollen, the faint signature of a climate that was almost this one, almost now, and then gone. If you ask the stone for a chronology, it gives you poetry. It remembers pressure more faithfully than names. It knows compression better than kings. And yet, on the floodplains between 2 ancient rivers, clay learned a new trick. It learned to hold the breath of thought. Here, in the wide palm of the alluvial plain, the planet's disorder met human desire for order. Silt arrived like seasonal ash, and left behind a blank page. The Tigris and Euphrates became tireless scribes, bringing the crushed memory of mountains to a place we would later call Sumer. Every inundation resurfaced the slate, every drought baked the slate harder. In this cyclic kiln, someone pressed a reed into clay. Each wedge was a footstep of meaning. Each line was a canal for sound. Cuneiform, the geometry of speech learning to stand up, but understand the paradox of the record. It survives best when disaster kisses it. A tablet left unbaked dissolves back into the tongue of the river. A tablet caught in a house fire vitrifies into stubborn memory. Flames, those careless, household gods, accidentally conferred eternity. The first library cards were baked by catastrophe, so the story you and I inherit is not an anthology. It is a box of charred pages. We tilt each piece to the light and read the contour of its edges as carefully as its words. We finger the margin where an entire decade fell away under a roof collapse. We notice a thumbprint fossilized beside a law about canals, a real thumb belonging to an unnamed scribe who leaned too near the wet clay, leaving his human punctuation like a comet imprinting a sky. We say first civilization out of convenience, and to honour an accomplishment that still staggers the spine. But even the phrase first trembles when you set it upon the tectonic table. First to do what? To write? To code grain and gods into the same administrative column? To convert surplus into cities, ziggurats into stairways for weather? The truth hums through contradictions. Sumer is both early and already late, both pioneer and inheritor, both dawn and an echo of other dawns drowned upriver in time. Because geology is not a neutral librarian. It is a stern redactor. It deletes with floods. It misfiles with wind. It collates with dust storms and foot traffic. It stamps lost on entire civilizations with a single drought line in a single ring of one single ancient tree. If the Earth had a catalogue, it would be cross-referenced to fire and entropy, and its interlibrary loans would be negotiated by fault lines. Still, there are places where the archive opens like a healed scar. Walk the desiccated avenues of Uruk in your mind, where clay cones once studded temple walls like constellations pressed into mud brick skies. Stand on a ziggurat at dawn, any ziggurat, it hardly matters which, and listen to the wind turn steps into syllables. Hear cattle-bone lyres turning stories into weather and weather into ritual. Smell bitumen, the planet's old tar perfume, binding boats and bricks and myths with the same black logic. Watch water negotiate with gravity through a web of canals, policy as hydraulics, theology as irrigation. But know this, for every artifact rescued, 1,000 returned to silence. Reeds rot, wool surrenders, timber becomes the opinion of ash. What remains obeys the stubbornness of minerals, the jewellery of an administrator's wife, the bevel of a seal, the baked curses and inventories that cities need as much as bread. This is not the record of a people. It is the record of what refuses to die. So when we begin the story of the Sumerians, their brick language, their ledger prayers, their machinery of temples and taxes, we begin with humility. We hold in our hands a puzzle that bleeds silt. The corner pieces are kingdoms, Eridu, Ur, Uruk, Lagash. The edge pieces are climate events and river tantrums. The middle pieces are missing, and the picture on the box is a dream we had about order. Let us adopt a discipline suited to ruins. We will not demand linearity from a palimpsest. We will not punish shards for not being vases. We will, instead, listen for patterns that recur across stone and song, across sky watching and sewing, across the muscle memory of cities learning how to stand. We will treat myth as metadata, architecture as astronomy in brick, and the human body as a living archive stamped by stress and wonder. We will watch how a people negotiates with the annual chaos of water, how they pay their gods with grain and their kings with silence, how they press the wind into syllables and ask the stars for signatures. If the earth is a damaged archive, then Sumer is a footnote that learned how to write itself in the imperative. It says, "Record me or I will flood you. Water me or I will dust you." It says, "The fields are contracts. The sky is a calendar. The law is a canal." It says, "If the gods are distant, measure them. If time wanders, number it. If language slips, wedge it into clay." And yet, even here, even in this first, you can feel the draft of an earlier door swinging shut. You can hear an undertow of older craft, older math, older rites that arrived like foreign seeds in a native furrow. It is not that Sumer came from nowhere. It is that the road in the floodplain has been repaved by every flood. What we call origins are simply the latest surfaces on which the ancient tide decides to write its name. So we start with an admission, and it is a gentle one. Our record is imperfect not because our ancestors were careless, but because the universe edits. Time does not merely pass, it revises, and in its revisions it underlines the sentences that matter most by allowing them to survive long enough for us to find them, dust them, and hold them up to the meagre but devoted firelight of our attention. Tonight we light that fire, we set the rescue tablet on our knees, we read not only what is inscribed, but what is missing, the space where a line once lived, the abrasion where a name once stood, the tiny hole where a reed pierced too deeply and made an accidental star. We begin not with certainty, but with the humility that certainty rarely survives the kiln. Welcome to Sumer, where clay becomes memory, and memory becomes law, and law, like a canal, tries to keep the river of time within banks it will always, eventually, overrun. We have been taught to see history as a line, a ruler drawn across the chalkboard of time, hunter-gatherers on the far left, agriculture at the midpoint, cities, kings, and laws marching neatly toward us, and then at the far right ourselves, modernity, the supposed culmination. This, they tell us, is progress, straight, unbroken, predictable. But stand for a moment beneath the silent shadow of Sumer's ziggurats. Look at their staircase rising to heaven, the heavy tiers layered like memory itself. Does it feel like a straight line, or more like a spiral? The problem of memory. We like to narrate history as if it were an escalator, one steady climb from caves to computers. But escalators do not shudder, collapse, or reverse. Civilizations do. The further back we look, the less the story resembles a climb, and the more it resembles a dream, punctuated, non-linear, stitched together by leaps that should not be possible. The leap from foraging to farming, the leap from mud huts to cities with walls, palaces, and mathematics, the leap from counting sheep on fingers to encoding law, astronomy, and trading clay. Each leap appears sudden, as though someone tore out the intermediate pages. Archaeologists assure us the transitions took thousands of years, and yes, the slow grind of adaptation is undeniable. But still, why do the earliest written records appear already sophisticated, already burdened with the vocabulary of taxes, contracts, gods, and kings? Why does the Sumerian world arrive not as a hesitant beginning, but as a full-throated orchestra already rehearsed? The contradiction of consciousness. Consider this. Our species has walked the earth in anatomically modern form for at least 200,000 years. For the vast majority of that time, we left behind stone tools, bones, and scattered campsites. And then, suddenly, within a sliver of that time span, we are making calendars, aligning temples with solstices, and inventing written law. Why so late? Why so sudden? Why there, in the floodplain of Mesopotamia? It is as if humanity wandered in a fog for ages, then stumbled into a clearing where the sky split open. Some suggest that population density finally crossed a threshold, creating the conditions for innovation. Others propose climatic shifts, forcing new strategies. These are reasonable explanations, but they do not dispel the sensation that something else intruded, some catalyst, some ignition spark not accounted for in our neat linear diagram. The false comfort of the timeline. Think of the timelines you were shown in school, a flat sequence of boxes: Paleolithic, Neolithic, Bronze Age, Iron Age. Each box follows the last as if culture were a conveyor belt. Yet when you place the actual evidence upon this conveyor, it refuses to sit still. Stone monuments older than agriculture, myths that encode astronomy long before telescopes, tools whose metallurgy seems out of place. The neat boxes fracture, the conveyor belt wobbles, and we, clinging to the idea of progression, tell ourselves it must still be linear. But what if it is not? What if history is less a line and more a palimpsest, eras written one atop another, older ink bleeding faintly through, confusing the story we think we are reading? Sumer as a case study in leaps. In Sumer, the leap is impossible to ignore. Imagine walking from the scattered camps of wandering tribes into the organized sprawl of Uruk, one of the world's first true cities. Tens of thousands of people, irrigation canals glinting under the sun, food surpluses tallied on clay tablets, priests tracking celestial movements from temple tops. Where did this complexity come from? The narrative says, from agriculture. But agriculture itself is a mystery. To domesticate a wild grass into wheat requires more than accident. It requires sustained selection across generations, an understanding of seed cycles, and a patience difficult to imagine in communities constantly moving. How did this begin? Who first looked at a wild grain and envisioned a future of bread and beer? And then who thought to encode these cycles in the sky, measuring planting and harvest against the dance of constellations? The Sumerians did not stumble blindly. They orchestrated. Already they charted Venus. Already they subdivided the circle into 360 degrees. Already they numbered hours, minutes, and seconds. This was not a child taking its first steps. This was a runner already sprinting. The leap beyond tools. Technology, too, jumps. Consider the wheel. One day, the human record shows dragging sledges. The next, axles and carts roll across the plains. The wheel appears around 3500 BCE, roughly concurrent with Sumer's rise, and not only as transport. The potter's wheel spins vessels smooth and symmetrical, far beyond the clumsy coil-built pots of earlier eras. Then, metallurgy. Copper smelted from stone, alloyed with tin into bronze. Did this unfold gradually? Perhaps. But when we look at the evidence, the story feels less gradual, more like stair steps, periods of silence punctuated by sudden eruptions of knowledge. It is as if humanity remembered something it had once forgotten. The linear illusion in myth. Even myths betray the illusion of linearity. The Sumerians themselves spoke of a time before kingship was lowered from heaven, when rulers were not mortal, but semi-divine, reigning for tens of thousands of years. These lists, preserved on clay tablets, are dismissed as exaggeration. But why would a culture invent such extravagant durations if not to encode a memory of something outside the normal rhythm of history? Perhaps myth is not delusion, but a code, a compressed file carrying fragments of a forgotten prelude, a world of punctuations, not lines. Think of history not as a line, but as music. There are rhythms, crescendos, silences. There are refrains that return across centuries. Cities rise, burn, are forgotten, rise again. The melody loops, but each loop varies, carrying echoes of the last. Sumer is one such refrain, louder than the others, preserved in clay and baked by accident into eternity. But behind its music you can hear a deeper theme, faint and unsettling, as though another composer's hand shaped the scale. Questioning our own story, the illusion of linearity comforts us because it places us at the end, at the pinnacle. If history is a staircase, then we are the top step. But if history is cyclical, if civilizations have risen and fallen before, then we are not the pinnacle. We are one more refrain, one more variation, one more precarious attempt at permanence in a world that does not grant it. The Sumerians believed themselves chosen, blessed by gods who gave them kingship and order, yet their cities crumbled, their rivers shifted, their gods were forgotten or absorbed into the pantheons of others. What does that say about us? About our skyscrapers and satellites? Returning to the archive of stone, Look again at the earth itself. Beneath our feet lie cities still buried, waiting for the shovel or the flood to reveal them. Every discovery unsettles the timeline. A temple older than farming, an astronomical alignment too precise for primitives, an artifact that whispers of mathematics before mathematics. Each time we stretch the ruler of history further back, forcing it to remain a line. We move the beginning a little earlier, but we keep the illusion intact. Rarely do we ask. Perhaps it is not a line at all, toward the impossible. And so, the illusion of linearity prepares us for the next step, the impossible artifact. An object so anomalous it does not fit on the line, an intruder that cannot be explained by slow progression. These objects whisper of forgotten hands, of lost sciences, of knowledge misplaced in the endless shuffle of cataclysm and rebirth. But before we turn to that artifact, pause. Stand in the ruins of Ur, where ziggurats climb toward vanished stars. Stand among the tablets, where cuneiform lists debts, hymns, and histories. Ask yourself, is this the dawn of history? Or is it the echo of something older, something erased, now re-emerging in clay? The line falters, the spiral deepens, history bends, loops, shatters. And in the fracture, a single artifact will speak louder than 1,000 theories. It will demand we reconsider everything we thought we knew about beginnings. That is where we turn next. History likes its puzzles tidy. It prefers the kind of artifacts that sit comfortably on museum shelves. Clay jars, bronze spears, fragments of frescoes. These are catalogued, labelled, and folded neatly into the timelines we were taught. But every so often something surfaces that resists assimilation, an artifact that does not belong where it is found, that speaks of a knowledge supposedly impossible for its time. These objects are the splinters under the skin of history. They refuse to let us rest. They whisper of other chapters torn from the book of humanity. And it is in these artifacts that the illusion of linearity cracks. Tonight, let us turn our eyes to one such impossible object, as though holding it gently in our hands beneath the dim lamplight of inquiry. A clockwork from the sea. In the year 1901, sponge divers exploring the waters off the Greek island of Antikythera stumbled upon the remnants of a Roman-era shipwreck. Among the statues, amphorae and jewellery was a corroded hunk of bronze and wood. At first, it seemed unimpressive, just a lump of rust and decay. It was catalogued and largely ignored, but decades later, when scholars X-rayed the lump, its secret was revealed. Inside were gears, intricate interlocking gears, cut with precision far beyond what the ancient world was thought capable of. The device, once reconstructed, proved to be an analog computer, designed to model the heavens. It could predict eclipses, track the cycles of the moon, and even chart the movements of the planets. The Antikythera mechanism, as it came to be called, was built around the 2nd century BCE. But by conventional history, mechanisms of such complexity should not have existed until at least the medieval era, 1,000 years later. Some compared it to a clock, but the first true mechanical clocks would not tick until the 14th century. This was a machine out of place, a technological time traveller embedded in rust. The discomfort of genius. Historians tried to explain it away. Perhaps it was a lone genius, a forgotten inventor centuries ahead of his time. Perhaps it was an experiment that failed to spread. But such explanations are bandages, not cures. The question lingers. How could the ancients possess such knowledge, build such precision, and then let it vanish? Because this is not a crude contraption. The gear teeth are cut with mathematical accuracy. The ratios encode celestial cycles known only through prolonged observation. Its very existence implies not just a craftsman, but a tradition, an inheritance of knowledge stretching back. And here is where the fracture widens. If one artifact could leap so far beyond its age, how many others lie undiscovered, or were erased by time's edits? How many libraries of impossible machines dissolved in fire or sea? Echoes across time. The Antikythera mechanism is not alone. It is merely the most famous whisper in a chorus of anomalies. Consider the Piri-Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. It depicts the coastlines of South America and Africa with startling accuracy, long before such surveys were possible. More strangely, some argue it shows the coast of Antarctica, ice-free as it was thousands of years ago. How could knowledge of ancient geographies persist across the Gulf of Ages to be copied into a Renaissance chart? Or think of Baghdad's so-called battery, a clay jar containing a copper cylinder and iron rod, dated to around 200 BCE. Some researchers suggest it could generate a weak electric current. Whether it was used for electroplating, healing, or ritual, we cannot be certain. But the implication lingers. Electricity, centuries before Galvani and Volta. Then there are the parts, out-of-place artifacts scattered across the world. Tiny golden figurines from Colombia shaped uncannily like airplanes, complete with tail fins and wings. Drill holes in ancient Egyptian stone, too precise and smooth for copper tools alone. Crystal lenses cut with geometrical sophistication. Each case can be contested, debated, explained away, yet together they form a pattern of dissonance, a shadow of another story. The shock of recognition, the power of the Antikythera mechanism, or any impossible artifact, is not merely in what it does, it is in how it feels. To stand before it in a museum case is to feel a subtle vertigo, a dizziness of recognition. We recognize modernity in the past, the familiar hand of precision reaching across centuries. It is as though the past is whispering. You're not the first. Others came before. You walk paths already trodden, paths you have forgotten. This is why such artifacts matter. They are not curiosities. They are cracks in the official story, letting in the draft of an older wind. The mechanism as mirror. Let us return to the Antikythera mechanism. Imagine it whole, gleaming in the hands of its maker. Imagine turning its dials and watching the tiny gears dance, the heavens unfolding in miniature before your eyes. This is not merely science. It is sacred. To compress the cosmos into brass and bronze is to declare, the universe is comprehensible and we can hold it. Such a device would not have been a toy. It was a ceremonial mirror, a bridge between ski and hand. It tells us the ancients did not merely watch the heavens. They modelled them, understood their cycles, sought to synchronize human time with cosmic time. And here is where the resonance with Sumer grows strong. Because the Sumerians too carved the cosmos into their daily lives. Their ziggurats were stairways of astronomy. Their gods were planets with personalities. Their mathematics was a mirror of the sky. The mechanism, though Greek, is a descendant of a much older hunger, the hunger to encode the universe in matter, to domesticate the stars as surely as wheat, when knowledge slips away. But then comes the silence. The Antikythera mechanism is unique. No other devices of its complexity survive from antiquity. Why? Did fire claim the workshops? Did conquest scatter the scrolls of instructions? Did the tradition die with its makers, swallowed by war and amnesia? Knowledge, we see, is not linear either. It blooms and withers, it leaps forward and collapses back. Sometimes it advances like a flood, sometimes it retreats like a tide. The mechanism is a fossil of one such bloom, proof that brilliance is not confined to our era, but flickers unpredictably across the dark sea of time. The Sumerian parallel. Here, the impossible artifact becomes more than an oddity. It becomes a lens for Sumer itself. Because when we look at Sumer's achievements, writing, irrigation, mathematics, we must ask, were these too sudden, too precise, too complete to have sprung from nothing? Were they, like the mechanism, fragments of an older inheritance, carried through flood and fire, reassembled in the floodplain of Mesopotamia? Perhaps the Sumerians were not inventors ex nihilo, but custodians of memory, piecing together shards of a knowledge older than themselves. Perhaps their gods, the Anunnaki descending from the heavens, were mythic reflections of a real inheritance. Techniques, measures, cosmologies passed down from forgotten hands. Just as the Antikythera mechanism encodes the stars in bronze, Sumer encoded them in myth and mathematics. Both point to the same possibility, that the wisdom of the ancients is not primitive but profound, not childish but astonishingly advanced, a single shard in a vast mosaic. And so, when we linger on one impossible artifact, we are not indulging in anomaly hunting. We are staring at a shard of a shattered mosaic, knowing that the rest of the picture is missing. One piece does not tell the whole story, but it proves that a story exists. If a single device can carry within it the precision of modern engineering 1,000 years early, then what else may have existed? If one map shows knowledge of lands long unseen, how many others were lost? If one jar may generate electricity, how many other sparks were extinguished? The impossible artifact is not the climax of curiosity, it is the beginning. It is the point where history stutters, where certainty dissolves, where imagination begins to reconstruct what the official record denies. Preparing the mind for the pattern, the Antikythera mechanism, the Piri Reis map, the Baghdad Battery, these are the first threads. But they are not random. They link across continents and centuries to a larger pattern. A pattern inscribed in stone, in myth, in geometry. A pattern that whispers of a global memory, a network of knowledge older than nations. This is where our journey must go next, from the artifact to the web, from the singular to the collective. For Sumer was not alone in gazing at the stars, nor in building with impossible precision. Across the oceans, in pyramids, temples, and serpent mounds, the same fingerprints appear, and so we leave the impossible artifact not as an isolated curiosity, but as a herald, a warning, a key. It tells us the past is not what you think. The story is not linear. The fragments are waiting, and when assembled, they will reveal a map not of progress, but of cycles, echoes reverberating across the globe. That is the pattern we will trace next. Imagine holding the Antikythera mechanism in one hand and a Sumerian clay tablet in the other. Both are compact, both are dense with encoded meaning, and both whisper of the heavens. Yet they belong to cultures separated not only by distance and language, but by entire epochs. Why then do their voices sound strangely in harmony? Because the impossible artifact is not an isolated miracle. It is a single spark in a constellation, a pattern that stretches across continents, a pattern carved into stone, woven into myth, and whispered in geometry. To see it, we must lift our gaze beyond Mesopotamia and let the world itself become our archive. The first pattern, pyramids that speak to the sky. In Egypt, the pyramids rise like fossilized sunbeams from the desert floor. Their geometry is too precise to dismiss as accident. The Great Pyramid at Giza is aligned to true north within a fraction of a degree, accuracy rivaling, and in some cases surpassing our modern surveying equipment. But the pattern does not end in Egypt. Thousands of miles away in Mesoamerica, the Maya and the Aztec built their own pyramids. Step pyramids crowned with temples, stairways climbing toward the sun. Though separated by oceans and millennia, both traditions echo the same impulse, to create mountains of stone that tether heaven and earth. Even further afield in China's Shanxi province, mysterious burial mounds rise beneath farmland, aligned with celestial orientations, and on the island of Java, Borobudur unfurls as a three-dimensional mandala, another cosmic mountain, another stairway for the soul. Why pyramids everywhere? Why this convergence upon the triangular, the stair-stepped, the sky-anchored? Scholars speak of independent invention, but patterns this precise across so many cultures begin to suggest something more, a shared blueprint, faint but insistent. The feathered serpent. Travel now to the ruins of Teotihuacan in Mexico, where the Avenue of the Dead stretches straight as an arrow beneath the Pyramid of the Sun. There, stone serpents ripple along the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, their feathered crests unmistakable. Cross the ocean to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, one of the oldest known temples dated to around 10,000 BCE. There, carved snakes coil along the limestone pillars, symbols entwined with stars and animals. The serpent, sometimes feathered, sometimes winged, sometimes biting its own tail, appears everywhere. In the caduceus of Mesopotamian gods, in the Ouroboros of Egypt, in the Nagas of India, in the rainbow serpent of Aboriginal myth. Always a boundary figure, always a guardian of thresholds between life and death, between earth and sky, between ignorance and knowledge. Is this mere coincidence? Or are we seeing the same archetype refracted through different tongues, carried across the world like pollen by winds older than writing itself? Stones that defy time. Consider Baalbek in Lebanon, where the Temple of Jupiter sits atop stones so massive they baffle modern engineers. The trilithon blocks weigh over 800 tons each, cut and moved without cranes or diesel. We do not know how. The Romans built atop them, but the foundation is far older, its builders nameless. Then look to Pumapunku in Bolivia, where megaliths are carved with such precision that razor blades slip between them. Angular cuts, perfect right angles, interlocking joints, techniques that seem to demand machine tools, not stone hammers. Even in Sumer itself, the ziggurats were not merely religious but architectural feats, layering clay and brick in patterns that resisted collapse despite millennia of floods. The pattern is not just scale but precision, as if humanity at some forgotten moment grasped a technology of stone now lost to us. Sacred geometry. The same geometrical signatures appear worldwide. The golden ratio, Fa, encoded in the Parthenon, in the pyramids, in Mayan temples, in Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. the flower of life etched into temple walls in Egypt, appearing again in far-off Asia. Geometry, it seems, was not invented but remembered, passed down like a secret language, whispering that the universe itself is mathematical and that the key to heaven is proportion. Why would cultures on opposite ends of the earth stumble upon the same ratios, the same fractal spirals, the same cosmic numbers? Unless those numbers were already embedded in the very fabric of memory, seeded like code in the human mind, or carried from an earlier epoch whose knowledge seeped into myth and stone. The sky is calendar everywhere. Sumer watched Venus. Egypt aligned to Orion. The Maya tracked the Pleiades. The builders of Stonehenge watched the solstices through pillars of stone. Everywhere, ancient cultures raised monuments to the sky, synchronizing earthly time with cosmic rhythms. And not crudely. They calculated precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis over 26,000 years. A cycle so vast no single human could observe it, yet encoded in myths of sky serpents, world ages and cosmic floods. The Dogon people of Mali told of Sirius, the dog star, and its invisible companion Sirius B, knowledge modern astronomy confirmed only with telescopes. How did they know? Why does this pattern of astronomical precision repeat across every culture, every continent? The Great Flood, a global memory. One of the clearest patterns is also the most devastating, the flood. Sumer speaks of Utnapishtim, who survived when the gods drowned the world. The Bible echoes this as Noah. India tells of Manu, warned by a fish. The Greeks of Deucalion, the Aztecs of a world destroyed by water. The Aboriginal Australians of rising seas chasing their ancestors inland. These are not random coincidences. They are global memories of a reset, of rising waters swallowing coasts, of civilizations drowned. Science too confirms that sea levels rose dramatically at the end of the last ice age, flooding vast stretches of land. The flood is not only myth, it is history transcribed into archetype, toward a global network. When you align these patterns, the pyramids, the serpents, the sacred geometry, the astronomical obsessions, the flood myths, you begin to see not isolated civilizations, but echoes of a single network. Not a network of ships and trade, though that may have come later. A network of memory, a cultural DNA transmitted across continents, perhaps seeded before the last great cataclysm, carried in fragments into each new age. Sumer is not an isolated beginning. It is a re-beginning, part of a global echo. Its writing, its myths, its gods are unique in form but not in essence. They resonate with Egypt, with Mesoamerica, with India, with the stones of forgotten builders. The problem of coincidence. Skeptics call it coincidence. They say pyramids are simply efficient for building tall structures. They say serpents are common symbols because they are universal creatures. They say astronomy was necessary for farming. But at some point coincidence becomes pattern, and pattern becomes evidence. When independent cultures repeat the same forms, the same ratios, the same myths, the same memories, we must ask, what underlying reality produced them? Was there a forgotten progenitor culture, a lost chapter of humanity erased by flood and fire? Were these blueprints carried forward by survivors, scattered into the soil of every new civilization? Or is there something deeper, that the human mind itself in its dreams and archetypes recalls a memory older than history? From artifact to thesis. The impossible artifact cracks the timeline. The global pattern shatters it. Together they reveal the central truth this journey seeks to uncover. Human history is not the first chapter. It is the final chapter of a book whose beginning has been torn out. The Sumerians, then, are not the first to awaken. They are the first whose awakening survived in baked clay. They are the first legible survivors of a memory much older, a memory encoded in stone, myth, and stars across the entire planet. And now, standing in the ruins of their ziggurats, listening to the whispers of pyramids and serpents from every corner of the earth, we prepare to state the thesis aloud. Every story yearns for a beginning. When we read a book, we expect its first chapter to introduce us gently, to offer the foundations upon which the rest of the narrative stands. Yet humanity's story does not begin with a chapter. It begins with a torn page. Our earliest firsts arrive already complete, already mature, as if they are continuations rather than origins. The clay tablets of Sumer, the pyramids of Egypt, the megaliths of forgotten builders, these are not hesitant sketches of a young species. They are confident declarations. Systems of law, agriculture, mathematics, and myth all appear fully articulated, as though whispered from a script that predates them. And so the thesis of this entire journey is simple yet shattering. Human history, as we are taught, is not the first chapter. It is the final chapter of a book whose beginning has been torn out. The broken spine of time. Picture a library where the earliest shelves have collapsed. The books that survive are scattered, out of order, some burned, some rewritten by later hands. The surviving fragments, the Sumerian tablets, Egyptian glyphs, Mayan codices, are misinterpreted as beginnings simply because they are the oldest things still legible. But what if they are not beginnings? What if they are sequels? What if the human story stretches back further, through cycles of rise and fall, through epochs drowned, burned or buried, until only scattered echoes remain? The Sumerians did not invent civilization from nothing. They inherited fragments. They gathered whispers from an older silence, encoded them in clay and passed them forward. Their brilliance is undeniable, but it may not have been original in the way we imagine. The echoes in clay. Consider what the Sumerians gave us: writing, codified law, irrigation, astronomy, mathematics based on sexagesimal, a system still haunting us in our 60 seconds and 360 degrees. These are colossal leaps, yet they arrive in the historical record like lightning from a clear sky. If Sumer is the dawn, why does the dawn feel so bright, so sudden, so rehearsed? Why do their myths, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, already speak of floods that erased earlier worlds, of kingship lowered from heaven, of gods teaching humans arts that seem alien in their completeness? The thesis whispers here too. The dawn is not dawn, it is a restart. Cycles of fire and water. The earth itself insists on this interpretation. Its climate is not linear, its geology not kind. Ice ages wax and wane. Volcanoes rewrite entire landscapes overnight. Meteor impacts redraw coastlines. Seas rise and swallow lands that once held thriving peoples. Each cataclysm is an eraser stroke across the chalkboard of culture. Entire civilizations could vanish, leaving only ambiguous scars, submerged ruins, anomalous artifacts, myths of catastrophe. Humanity forgets, then remembers. It rises again, convinced it is first. This is not speculation, it is pattern. Archaeology finds older and older settlements, Göbekli Tepe, Jericho, Çatalhöyük, each pushing civilization deeper into the fog. Yet even these may be sequels themselves, inheritors of deeper traditions erased almost entirely. The palimpsest of myth. Myth functions here as the great repository of memory. Myths are not fairy tales, they are data archives, compressed and symbolic, designed to outlast the collapse of libraries. Floods, serpents, world ages, gods descending from the sky, golden ages followed by decline, all of these recur globally. Why? Because myths encode real memories of cyclical history. They are the dreams of civilizations that knew they were not first, that sensed they themselves were continuations. When the Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki granting them wisdom, when the Egyptians spoke of the followers of Horus, when Mesoamericans spoke of Quetzalcoatl teaching agriculture, they were not fabricating childish fantasies. They were encoding echoes of inheritance, the fragility of knowledge. Our modern arrogance blinds us. We believe knowledge is cumulative, ever building, always advancing. But knowledge is fragile. Burn a library and millennia of thought vanish overnight. Sink a coastline beneath rising seas, and cities dissolve to silt. Kill the scribes, scatter the priests, silence the astronomers, and knowledge can vanish for centuries. We, who live in the digital age, assume permanence, but our hard drives corrode, our servers depend on electricity, our cloud is only as eternal as the corporations that maintain it. Should catastrophe strike tomorrow, how much of our knowledge would survive 500 years? 5,000. So too with the ancients. Their knowledge survived in fragments, in impossible artifacts, in myths coded as story, in megaliths aligned to stars. Enough to suggest sophistication, but not enough to reconstruct the whole. The archaeological dissonance. When confronted with anomalies, archaeology shrugs. The Antikythera mechanism becomes a lone genius. Baalbek becomes brute labour. Piri Reis becomes coincidence. The myths become metaphors. But dismissals are not explanations. They are evasions. The anomalies remain, like splinters. They itch at the linear model, demanding a cyclical one. And so the thesis sharpens. Humanity is older than its own memory allows. Civilizations have risen and fallen multiple times. We are inheritors of fragments, not pioneers on virgin ground. The psychological impact. To accept this thesis is unsettling. It removes our sense of being unique, of being the pinnacle of history. It humbles us. We are not the first intelligent civilization, but one in a series, perhaps even one in a loop. Yet it also empowers us. If others came before, their echoes remain in us, in our myths, our archetypes, even our DNA. We are not orphans of time, but descendants of forgotten giants. Their voices live in our symbols, their mathematics in our measures, their fears in our dreams. This recognition reframes history. Instead of a line marching toward progress, it becomes a spiral, sometimes rising, sometimes falling, always circling the same archetypal patterns. The Sumerian role, here the Sumerians emerge as the fulcrum. They are not the first, but the first we can still read. Their clay tablets survive where others dissolved. Their myths were preserved, their gods renamed, their measures absorbed into the bloodstream of later cultures. They are the visible tip of a deeper iceberg. Behind them lies silence. Beneath them lie erased chapters. Ahead of them lies Egypt, Greece, Rome, and finally us. But the line is false. It is not forward. It is cyclical, spiraling through collapse and rebirth. The Sumerians are the guardians of a doorway, standing at the threshold between remembered history and forgotten prehistory, naming the thesis aloud, so let us state it clearly, as if carving it into clay ourselves. Human history is not the first chapter. It is the final chapter of a book whose beginning has been torn out. Our story is an incomplete palimpsest. We are children trying to reconstruct a lineage from scattered bones and half-burned manuscripts. We mistake fragments for origins, sequels for beginnings, ruins for inventions. The Sumerians were brilliant, yes, but brilliance shines brightest when it is kindled by memory. Their ziggurats and cuneiform, their astronomy and myths, are fragments of a knowledge older than themselves, carried through flood and fire into the Mesopotamian dawn. A pause before the next movement, and so Act 1 closes. We began by fracturing the linear illusion, then followed anomalies into global patterns, and finally declared the thesis outright. Now the stage is set. Ahead lies the evidence, the megaliths, the myths, the DNA, the unconscious itself. Ahead lies the proof that the Sumerians were inheritors, not initiators, and that the Book of Humanity has many erased beginnings. For now, hold this thesis gently in your mind, like a shard of pottery whose pattern hints at the missing vase. Feel the discomfort of its implications, the humility it demands, and the awe it awakens. The story of Sumer is not the beginning. It is the echo of beginnings erased, a chapter salvaged from fire, and to understand it fully we must journey deeper, into the fingerprints left in stone, in myth, and in our very blood. The clay tablets of Sumer whisper the story of writing and law. But the earth itself holds another kind of text, an older, harder archive written not in cuneiform but in stone. Across continents scattered like bones of a forgotten titan, stand monuments so massive, so precise, that even today we strain to explain them. Their builders are often nameless, their tools are invisible, their techniques lost. These are not mere ruins, they are fingerprints, impressions left by ancient engineers whose names did not survive but whose stones remained stubborn, impossible, immovable. Baalbek, the weight of the impossible. In Lebanon, at the site of Baalbek, stand stones so vast that they redefine our imagination of labour. The so-called trilithon blocks, forming part of the Temple of Jupiter's foundation, each weigh over 800 tons. Nearby lies the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, an unfinished block weighing more than 1,000 tons, still partly attached to its quarry. To put this in perspective, modern cranes, the kind used to build skyscrapers, can barely lift such weights. And yet, thousands of years ago, these blocks were cut, moved, and placed with precision, stacked like children's toys. Roman builders later erected temples atop this foundation. But the Romans themselves admitted they had inherited the platform. It was older than their work. Who cut these stones? With what tools? And why build at such a scale, far beyond practical necessity? The stones whisper of lost knowledge, of engineers whose ambition dwarfed even empire. Pumapunku, stone carved like metal. Travel now to the high plateau of Bolivia, to a site called Pumapunku, part of the larger Tiwanaku complex. Here, scattered blocks of andesite and red sandstone litter the earth, as if some great workshop exploded. These stones are not merely large, they are precise. They feature interlocking joints, right angles cut as if by machine, holes drilled with exact symmetry. The H-shaped blocks fit together like prefabricated components. Some edges are so sharp, so geometrical, that they defy the crude tools attributed to the builders. Conventional archaeology dates the site to around 500 CE. But local traditions and geological arguments suggest parts of it could be far older. The question remains, how did people without steel tools, without diamond drills, without modern machinery, achieve such cuts? One cannot walk Pumapunku without feeling the hum of forgotten technology. It is less a ruin than a fossilized factory floor. Egypt, the precision of eternity. The pyramids of Giza are often admired for their size, but their true mystery lies in their precision. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north within 360 of a degree. Its base is nearly a perfect square, with sides differing in length by mere inches across hundreds of meters. The limestone casing stones, now mostly gone, once fit together so tightly that even a blade could not pass between them. Inside, the granite blocks of the king's chamber weigh 25 to 80 tons, quarried and transported across miles. The shafts align with specific stars, Orion, Sirius, suggesting an astronomical purpose embedded within architecture. Mainstream Egyptology explains this as the result of vast labour forces and simple tools applied over decades. And perhaps so, yet the precision continues to trouble. Why such care in alignment? Why such perfection, unless the builders were encoding something deeper? Mathematics, cosmology, eternity itself. The pyramid is not just a tomb, it is a theorem in stone, a monument to knowledge as much as to kings. Stonehenge and beyond, circles of power. On the Salisbury Plain of England, Stonehenge stands as a ring of monoliths, weathered yet enduring. Archaeologists see in it a ceremonial site, a place of ritual. But alignments with solstices suggest something more. A calendar in stone, a clock of the cosmos. And Stonehenge is not alone. Across Britain and Ireland, across Brittany and France, stone circles and alignments proliferate. Karnak, with its rows of standing stones stretching for miles. Callanish, on the Isle of Lewis, aligned to lunar cycles. These megaliths were not shelters or fortresses. They were instruments, tools for tracking the heavens, for synchronizing human ritual with cosmic rhythm. And they were built with effort so great that entire generations must have devoted themselves to the task. Why? What compelled ancient peoples to drag stones across landscapes, to erect them with impossible labour? Was it faith, or was it memory? An inheritance of knowing that the sky itself dictated survival, and that only by aligning with it could humanity endure. Forgotten metallurgy, Damascus steel and beyond. Stone is not the only archive. Metal, too, carries the fingerprints of lost engineers. Consider Damascus steel, a material used in blades from the medieval Near East, legendary for its strength, sharpness and resilience. The secret of its creation was lost for centuries. Modern science has revealed that its strength derived from nanostructures of carbon nanotubes, technology rediscovered only recently, yet embedded in ancient craft. If metallurgy once held such secrets, what else may have been forgotten? Ancient India spoke of Vajra, weapons of lightning, and of Woot steel prized across empires. The Chinese smelted iron centuries before Europe. Time and again, technologies flowered, then withered, leaving behind only whispers. The pattern emerges. Knowledge is not cumulative, but cyclical. Civilizations discover, perfect, forget. The fingerprints of lost engineers remain in anomalous blades, impossible stones, unexplained alignments. Why build beyond necessity? This question echoes across all these sites. Why build so vast, so heavy, so precise, when smaller, simpler structures would suffice? Why drag 800-ton blocks instead of modest ones? Why align pyramids to stars invisible to the naked eye? Why carve stones at Pumapunku with precision fit for metal? The answer may lie in memory. Perhaps these cultures were not inventing but reenacting, replicating echoes of older blueprints. Perhaps they built so massively because they wanted permanence, to resist the erosion of time and flood. Or perhaps the scale itself had meaning, resonance with cosmic proportions, sacred geometry embodied in mass. In every case, practicality fails to explain ambition. These monuments were not pragmatic, they were proclamations. They declare, we were here, We knew the heavens, we touched eternity. The silence of names. Who were the engineers behind Baalbek, Pumapunku, Giza? Their names are lost. We know kings, priests, conquerors, but the builders are shadows. Anonymous, forgotten, erased. This is the paradox of ancient engineering. Its monuments survive, but its makers do not. The engineers vanish, leaving only their fingerprints in stone. It is as though they never wanted to be remembered individually, but only through their work. Or perhaps catastrophe erased their lineages, leaving stones as their only testament. The absence of names forces us to confront the possibility of older civilizations swallowed by time, their identities dissolved, their achievements surviving only in anomalous ruins. The return to Sumer. How does this all connect to Sumer? Because the Sumerians themselves spoke of builders who preceded them. In their king lists, reigns stretched back tens of thousands of years, impossibly long yet suggestive of a prehistory erased. Their gods, the Anunnaki, were described as descending with knowledge of architecture, astronomy, law. Perhaps these myths encode memory of nameless engineers, of builders who raised monuments before the flood, whose knowledge seeped into Sumer as inheritance. Perhaps the ziggurats were not novel but a continuation, a local expression of a global blueprint. Just as Baalbek's platform was inherited by Romans, so too may Sumer have inherited fragments of earlier wisdom, carrying them forward in clay. The pattern of the fingerprints. Across Baalbek, Pumapunku, Giza, Stonehenge and beyond, the pattern is unmistakable. Scale beyond necessity. Precision beyond explanation. Alignment with cosmic order. Anonymity of builders. Survival of stone while names vanish. These are the fingerprints of nameless engineers. They suggest not isolated achievements, but echoes of a shared memory. They whisper of civilizations erased, of cycles of rise and collapse, of knowledge inherited in fragments. The stage ahead. Having touched these fingerprints, we move deeper into the pattern. Next comes the language that binds them, the geometry etched into temples, the ratios that appear in pyramids, the flower of life repeating across continents. For if the stones are fingerprints, then geometry is the DNA, the universal code connecting builders across time and space. We are moving closer now, from fragments toward the underlying script, from artifacts to patterns, from stone to the very mathematics of creation. If the fingerprints of the nameless engineers are left in stone, then the ink they wrote with was geometry. Across continents, across millennia, across cultures that never met, the same patterns emerge. Spirals, ratios, mandalas, lattices. These are not decorative flourishes. They are the secret architecture of reality itself, inscribed by ancient builders into temples, pyramids, and myths. Sacred geometry is the hidden grammar of creation. It is the language that bridges matter and meaning, physics and spirit, human and divine. To walk among ancient ruins is to wander through sentences written in angles and arcs, a script older than alphabets, older even than myth. The geometry of the universe. Before humanity carved symbols into clay, the cosmos carved them into light and matter. Look to a sunflower and you will see spirals that obey the Fibonacci sequence. Look to a nautilus shell, and you will find the logarithmic spiral, expanding infinitely, yet never breaking form. Snowflakes grow into sixfold symmetry. Galaxies whirl into spirals vast as eternity. Geometry is not invention. It is discovery. It is the underlying skeleton of the universe. When ancient architects built according to these ratios, they were not decorating. They were harmonizing. They were tuning stone to the same frequencies that shape seashells and stars. The golden ratio, perhaps the most famous of these harmonies, is the golden ratio, 5 pi, approximately 1.618. It appears when a line is divided so that the smaller part relates to the larger, as the larger relates to the whole. This ratio is everywhere, in the branching of trees, in the spirals of galaxies, in the proportions of the human body, even in the very DNA that encodes life. Ancient architects knew this intuitively. The Parthenon in Greece follows F. So too does the Great Pyramid of Giza, whose proportions mirror the ratio between the base and the height. Mayan temples, Gothic cathedrals, Renaissance paintings, all pulse with the same ratio, as if guided by an invisible hand. Why? Because F is not arbitrary. It is resonance. Structures built according to F feel balanced, harmonious, alive. The ancients sensed this harmony and carved it into eternity. The flower of life. Step into the temple of Osiris at Abydos, Egypt. and you will find, carved faintly into the stone, the flower of life. Overlapping circles create a lattice of perfect symmetry, unfolding into hexagons, stars, and fractals. This pattern, found across cultures, encodes within it the Platonic solids, the cube, tetrahedron, octahedron, dodecahedron, icosahedron, the fundamental shapes from which all matter is built. The flower of life is more than ornament. It is a cosmogram, a diagram of creation itself. It whispers that reality is geometric, that behind the flux of life lies an order of perfect symmetry. The same pattern reappears in ancient Chinese art, in medieval alchemy, in sacred mandalas of Hinduism and Buddhism. The lattice is universal, as though it wells up from the collective unconscious, as though civilizations separated by oceans were drinking from the same hidden spring. Architecture is frozen music. The ancients did not distinguish between geometry and music. To them, both were harmonies, one of sound, the other of space. Pythagoras spoke of the music of the spheres, the idea that planets themselves move in ratios akin to musical intervals. Temples were tuned like instruments, resonant chambers, echoing halls, domes aligned with the heavens. These were not only shelters for ritual, but instruments designed to vibrate with cosmic harmony. To walk into a ziggurat, to stand inside a Gothic cathedral, is to enter frozen music, geometry solidified into stone. Geometry in Sumer. Did the Sumerians know these patterns? Their mathematics was sexagesimal, base 60, still embedded in our time and circles. Their ziggurats were stairways not only to the heavens, but of proportions echoing cosmic measures. Their myths encoded numbers, 12 gods, 12 constellations, 12 divisions of the sky. The Sumerian calendar synchronized with celestial cycles, their temples aligned to cardinal directions. Though we lack explicit diagrams of F or the flower of life from Mesopotamia, the resonance is unmistakable. Their architecture and cosmology hum with the same hidden ratios, the same archetypal geometry. It is as if the knowledge was not invented but inherited, carried across cultures, emerging in different forms but with the same essence. The mandala and the labyrinth. In India, the mandala unfolds as a sacred diagram, a map of the cosmos in concentric patterns. In medieval Europe, the labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral invites pilgrims to walk a path spiralling inward to the centre. Both are geometries of journey, mirrors of the soul's path. How is it that India and France, separated by oceans and centuries, expressed the same archetype? Because geometry is not cultural, it is universal. It is the language of psyche as much as of stone. Geometry and the gods. In myth, gods are often associated with numbers. Thoth, in Egypt, was lord of measure. Hermes in Greece carried the caduceus with its twin spirals. Vishnu reclines upon the cosmic serpent, whose coils are cycles of time. The gods themselves are embodiments of geometry, anthropomorphized ratios, personified harmonies. To worship these gods was to acknowledge geometry as divine. To build temples in their honor was to mirror the cosmos in miniature, to anchor heaven upon earth through proportion. Why geometry matters. It would be easy to dismiss sacred geometry as superstition or coincidence. But modern science, too, finds geometry at the core of reality. Quantum fields vibrate in symmetrical patterns. Crystals grow in lattices. Energy seeks the path of least resistance, creating spirals and waves. The ancients sensed this intuitively. They carved it into stone, into myth, into ritual. Sacred geometry was not ornament but ontology, the recognition that reality itself is number and ratio. By embedding geometry into temples and myths, they preserved knowledge not as text but as experience. Anyone standing in a pyramid aligned to the stars, anyone gazing into a mandala, anyone tracing the path of a labyrinth, whether they understood consciously or not, was resonating with cosmic order. The global code, from Egypt to Sumer, from India to Mesoamerica, from Stonehenge to Angkor Wat, the same codes appear. Spirals, circles, ratios, alignments. This is not cultural diffusion alone. It is as if humanity carried within itself an instinct for geometry, an inheritance from an earlier age when such knowledge was whole. The universality suggests a shared memory, a global network of sacred science fragmented by cataclysm, but surviving in symbols. Each culture expressed it differently, but the core was the same. The recognition that creation is geometric, and to live in harmony with it is to align oneself with the divine, toward the cosmic blueprint. Sacred geometry prepares us for the next step. The realization that ancient people were not merely decorating their world, but synchronizing it with the cosmos. Their monuments were not just geometric, they were astronomical, aligned to solstices, equinoxes, and cycles of precession. Geometry is the grammar, astronomy is the story. Together they form the cosmic blueprint, a map not only of stars but of time itself. This is where our journey leads next, from geometry etched into stone to astronomy etched into the sky, where myth and mathematics converge in the dance of planets and stars. Geometry provided the grammar, the silent framework of proportion and symmetry. But the ancients did not stop at ratios and shapes. They looked upward, into the dark canopy scattered with stars, and there they found the grand script from which all geometry descends. For if sacred geometry is the alphabet of creation, then astronomy is the sentence structure of time itself. Across the world, ancient cultures synchronized their monuments, their myths, their calendars, even their gods to the sky. They were not stargazers in the romantic sense, idly admiring the heavens. They were engineers of time, decoding a cosmic blueprint that governed agriculture, ritual, kingship, and fate. The sky as a clock. Today we glance at the sky and see beauty. The ancients saw schedule, order, mandate. The rising of a star marked planting. The solstice signaled harvest. Eclipses foretold upheaval. To them the heavens were not distant. They were the machinery of existence. Imagine living before electricity, before clocks. The night sky was your calendar, your textbook, your temple ceiling. Patterns of stars returning with seasonal regularity became a rhythm as steady as breath. To track them was to survive. To interpret them was to rule. The Sumerians were among the earliest astronomers. Their cuneiform tablets record meticulous observations of the heavens. They identified constellations, tracked planetary movements, and synchronized lunar and solar calendars. To them, each star was not just a light but a deity, a point of correspondence between earth and sky. Ziggurats as observatories. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia were stairways not only for gods but for eyes. Their height gave priests vantage points to watch the heavens, to note the risings and settings of stars. From these elevated temples they measured the heavens against the earth, transforming sky into calendar, calendar into ritual, ritual into civilization. The ziggurat of Ur, for instance, aligned with cardinal directions, grounding cosmic order into brick. Each tier mirrored heaven, a layered mountain that turned celestial cycles into architectural form. The ziggurat was both altar and instrument. Egypt and Orion's belt. Travel west to Egypt, where the pyramids of Giza mirror the 3 stars of Orion's belt. This is no coincidence. The shafts inside the Great Pyramid point to Orion and Sirius, stars associated with Osiris and Isis, deities of death and rebirth. To the Egyptians, the soul of the pharaoh travelled to the stars upon death, joining the eternal cycle. Thus, aligning pyramids with Orion was not aesthetic, it was metaphysical engineering. The pharaoh's tomb became a cosmic launch pad, synchronizing mortal death with stellar immortality. Even more astonishing, the alignment of the pyramids to Orion's belt matches the configuration of those stars not in 2500 BCE, but in 10,500 BCE. This suggests the builders encoded a memory of a sky thousands of years earlier, a date when Orion stood differently in the heavens. Was this an intentional remembrance, a whisper of a much older epoch? The Mayan calendar and the Pleiades. Across the ocean, the Maya tracked Venus with obsessive precision. They knew its synodic cycle, 584 days, down to the last detail. Their calendar system was astonishing. Interlocking cycles of 260 days, 365 days, and longer counts stretching thousands of years. They aligned temples to equinoxes and solstices, designing stairways where shadows became serpents slithering down at specific moments. At Chichen Itza, during the equinox, light and shadow animate the steps of El Castillo, summoning the feathered serpent god Kukulkan. The Maya also revered the Pleiades, a star cluster visible in Taurus. At key moments, the Pleiades marked agricultural cycles. Even today, indigenous groups across the world, from Japan to the Pacific Islands, revere the Pleiades. Why does this cluster appear globally significant? Perhaps because it was a marker of great cycles, or because it held meaning in a much older global cosmology, now fragmented into myth. The mystery of precession. One of the most staggering achievements of ancient astronomy is the recognition of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis. which shifts the background stars over a 26,000-year cycle. Precession is nearly impossible to observe directly in a single lifetime. It requires meticulous records across centuries. Yet myths across the world encode it. The division of history into world ages, each ruled by different constellations, reflects knowledge of precession. The zodiac itself is a precessional map, a grand calendar of ages. How did the ancients know this? Did they inherit records from a culture that had already observed the cycle? Did they encode precession into myth precisely because they feared losing it in collapse? The Sumerians named 12 constellations, the forerunners of our zodiac. Egyptians spoke of cosmic ages tied to rising stars. Hindu cosmology divides time into yugas, vast cycles echoing precessional spans. Again and again, the pattern returns. The sky as a great wheel, its turning dictating the rise and fall of worlds. Göbekli Tepe, an ancient sky temple. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, pillars more than 11,000 years old are carved with animals and symbols. Some researchers suggest these carvings are not random but astronomical, encoding constellations. One pillar, the so-called vulture stone, has been interpreted as a map of the sky at the time of a great comet impact around 10,150 BCE, an event linked by some to the Younger Dryas period of sudden climate change. If this interpretation is correct, Göbekli Tepe is not just the oldest known temple. It is an astronomical observatory, a record of cosmic catastrophe. It suggests that even before agriculture, humans were sky watchers, encoding cosmic events into stone. Myth as astronomical memory. Myth and astronomy intertwine seamlessly. The Sumerian Anunnaki descending from heaven are stars descending on the horizon. The Egyptian battle between Horus and Set reflects the struggle of light and darkness, of solstices. The Greek story of Persephone, who spends part of the year in the underworld, is the agricultural cycle, tied to the seasons. Myths are compressed star maps, narratives designed to preserve celestial knowledge when the sky itself might change, or when language might fail. By personifying stars as gods, by encoding cycles as dramas, cultures ensured that even if libraries burned, the knowledge survived in story. Cosmic catastrophes in the sky. Astronomy was not only about cycles of fertility and time, it was also about warning. Eclipses, comets, meteor showers, all were seen as omens, and perhaps rightly so. Catastrophes have come from the sky before. The impact that ended the dinosaurs was only the most famous. Cometary fragments, solar flares, even subtle cosmic shifts, all threaten human life. The ancients may have encoded catastrophic events into their sky lore as memory and warning. Flood myths tied to astronomical alignments suggest humanity preserved cosmic trauma in mythic form. The cosmic blueprint defined. What emerges from all this is the realization that ancient astronomy was not superstition. It was science fused with myth, mathematics fused with story. It was a cosmic blueprint, a way of mapping heaven onto earth, of synchronizing human life with universal cycles. Geometry provided harmony. Astronomy provided rhythm. Myth provided memory. Together they created civilizations aligned not only with rivers and fields but with stars and galaxies. To build in stone was to freeze the sky into permanence, to anchor cosmic order in human time. The Sumerian contribution. The Sumerians, among the first recorded astronomers, codified constellations, tracked planetary motions, and created calendars that echoed cosmic cycles. Their myths, of Anu, Enlil, and Inanna, were not mere stories but astronomical allegories. Venus, for example, was Inanna, her cycle of rising and disappearing mirroring the goddess's descent into the underworld and return. By embedding astronomy into myth, they ensured that cosmic knowledge became cultural knowledge. No farmer, no child, no priest could escape the sky's presence in ritual and story. The Sumerians exemplify the cosmic blueprint. Their cities, aligned to cardinal directions. Their myths, tied to celestial bodies. Their numbers, encoding cycles of time. Toward the archive of myth, we have traced geometry, then astronomy. But there is one more layer to this archive. Myth itself, functioning not only as story but as compressed data. Myths encode not just the stars but the history of humanity, the memory of floods, the cycles of ages, the psychology of survival. To move forward, we must learn to read myth not as fantasy but as encrypted archive. For in myth, the fragments of torn beginnings are preserved, hidden in allegory, awaiting decoding. We have walked among the stones, measured their alignments, traced their geometry. We have looked upward into the sky and seen how civilizations treated the stars as both calendar and scripture. But now we must turn to the most mysterious archive of all, myth. Unlike stone or star, myth is mutable. It bends, it morphs, it adapts to tongue and time, and yet, within its symbols, it preserves something astonishing. Data. Myth is not fantasy. Myth is encryption. It is the compressed memory of humanity's forgotten chapters, coded into stories so resilient that they survive even when empires burn and languages die. To decode myth is to unzip a file left by our ancestors, to recover not only their fears and hopes, but their science, their history, their catastrophes. Myth as memory technology. In a world before books, before clay tablets, before libraries, how do you preserve knowledge across generations? You weave it into story. A tale is easier to remember than a table of numbers. A drama is harder to forget than a formula. If you want people to remember the cycles of Venus, you tell of a goddess who disappears into the underworld and rises again. If you want them to remember the danger of floods, you tell of a hero who builds a boat and saves the seed of life. If you want them to recall the shifting of constellations, you create a saga of gods at war, their battles mapping the slow movement of stars. Myth is not childish. Myth is mnemonic. It is information design at the scale of civilization. The hero's journey is cosmic cycle. Consider the archetypal hero's journey described by Joseph Campbell. The hero departs, suffers trials, dies or descends, and returns transformed. This cycle is not only psychological, it mirrors the astronomical cycles. The sun dies each night, descends into the underworld, and returns at dawn. Planets vanish from the sky, then reappear. Seasons die into winter, then return with spring. The hero is the cosmos. The journey is the cycle. In myth, we are taught not only about ourselves but about the rhythm of the universe. Sumerian myth as astronomical code. Take the myth of Inanna's descent. The goddess of love and war journeys into the underworld, stripped of her garments at each gate, killed, hung on a hook, and then resurrected. On one level it is drama. On another, it encodes the cycle of Venus. Venus disappears from the sky for about 8 days, then re-emerges as the morning star. The stripping of garments mirrors the stages of disappearance. The death is the invisibility. The return is the reappearance. Thus, the myth is not random. It is compressed astronomy, disguised as divine drama. A farmer or priest hearing the story learns the cycle of Venus without needing charts. Myth is the sky, retold as story. Flood myths as historical data. Flood myths abound worldwide. Sumer's Utnapishtim, the Bible's Noah, India's Manu, the Aztec flood, the Aboriginal rising seas, everywhere, waters rise and worlds reset. Modern geology tells us that at the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, sea levels rose dramatically as glaciers melted. Entire coastlines vanished. Cities, if they existed, would have drowned. Myth preserved this. The flood stories are not imagination. They are collective memory of real cataclysm. Encoded in story, the memory survived long after the waters receded, long after maps were redrawn. In this way, myth is oral geology. It is pre-scientific history. It is humanity's survival mechanism against amnesia. The serpent and the axis. The serpent is another global mythic symbol. In Sumer, Ningish-Siddha, the serpent god, guards the underworld. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl is the feathered serpent. In India, Anantashesha, the serpent of infinity, coils beneath Vishnu. In Norse myth, Jörmungandr encircles the world. Why serpents everywhere? Because the serpent encodes cycles. Its coiling body is the spiral of time. Its shedding skin is renewal. Its biting tail is the Ouroboros of eternity. Serpents also resemble rivers, lightning, DNA helices, even the Milky Way's serpentine band. The serpent is not coincidence. It is a symbolic compression of multiple cosmic truths, cycles, eternity, energy, time. Myth is multi-layered code. Each myth operates on several levels at once. Literal, a story of gods, heroes, monsters. Psychological, archetypes of the human psyche as Carl Jung recognized. Astronomical, encoded star maps and cycles. Historical, memories of floods, cataclysms, migrations. Initiatory, ritual lessons for personal transformation. This multi-layered nature is why myths endure. They are flexible yet precise, symbolic yet practical. A child can hear them as fairy tales. A priest can interpret them as ritual. A farmer can use them as calendars. A sage can read them as metaphysics. Myth is an operating system that runs at multiple levels simultaneously. Comparative mythology is decryption. When myths repeat across cultures, their shared elements point to universal truths. Comparative mythology becomes a tool of decryption. Floods appear everywhere, a memory of rising seas. Serpents appear everywhere, cycles and eternity. World ages destroyed and reborn, knowledge of precession. Sky gods descending to teach, memories of lost civilizers. When patterns recur, coincidence shrinks. What emerges is the silhouette of a shared memory, fractured across tongues but pointing to the same forgotten events. The role of initiation. In many ancient cultures, myths were not told for entertainment but enacted in initiation rites. The initiate descended into darkness, faced trials, died, and emerged transformed. These rites mirrored the myths, which mirrored the cosmos. Initiation was education. It was not about belief, but about memory, training individuals to embody the cosmic cycles, to carry the compressed data forward in their very lives. Thus, myth was not passive. It was active software, running on the human psyche, ensuring that even if texts burned and cities fell, the knowledge would persist embodied in ritual. The psychological dimension. Carl Jung argued that myths are archetypes emerging from the collective unconscious. They are not invented but discovered, rising from the deep layers of psyche shared by all humanity. This perspective aligns with the idea of myth as compressed data. Whether one views the archetypes as psychological or as inherited memory of forgotten history, the result is the same. Myths are timeless, universal, resilient. They reappear because they are too deeply wired into us to vanish. Myth and Sumer's place. For the Sumerians, myth was not peripheral, it was the core. Their gods were not abstract, they were the forces of sky and earth personified. Their king lists were not fiction, they were attempts to preserve memory of world ages. Their epics were not entertainment, they were astronomical and spiritual textbooks disguised as narrative. In decoding Sumerian myth, we decode a civilization's attempt to preserve what it had inherited. Fragments of older knowledge, encrypted into story so it could survive the flood of time, toward the Great Flood memory. We are now ready for the next case study, the flood. Among all myths, it is the most universal, the most haunting, the most insistent. It appears in every culture, from Mesopotamia to the Pacific Islands. It encodes geology, astronomy, and trauma. To understand the flood is to glimpse the reset button of history. It is to see how civilizations fall, how knowledge drowns, and how memory survives only in myth. The flood is the ultimate compressed archive, a global data packet of cataclysm. Water is both cradle and grave. It nourishes fields, but it also swallows coasts. It cleanses, but it also erases. Of all the forces humanity has faced, water is the most relentless archivist, burying and obliterating while simultaneously preserving whispers in silt and sediment. So it is no accident that among the world's myths, one story is most universal: the Great Flood. Whether you travel to Mesopotamia, to the jungles of Central America, to the icy fjords of Scandinavia, or to the dreamtime of Aboriginal Australia, you will find the same refrain. The waters rose, the world drowned, a chosen one survived, life began again. Why do we encounter this story everywhere? Is it coincidence, metaphor, or memory? To explore this question is to stand at the intersection of geology, myth, and human psychology. The Sumerian account, Utnapishtim and the Flood. Our case study begins, appropriately, in Sumer. On clay tablets etched in cuneiform, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, we meet Utnapishtim, the Mesopotamian counterpart of Noah. The gods decide to send a flood to annihilate humanity, but Ea, the trickster deity of wisdom, warns Utnapishtim. He builds a great boat, seals it with pitch, and loads it with the seed of all life. When the waters recede, his vessel comes to rest upon a mountain. He releases birds to test if the land is dry. Finally, he makes an offering, and the gods, softened, grant him immortality. This story predates the biblical Noah by over a millennium. Yet the parallels are uncanny. Boat, birds, mountain, sacrifice. Clearly the Hebrew scribes inherited and reshaped a tale already ancient. But the Sumerian version itself may not be original. Some scholars argue it echoes even older oral traditions, perhaps memories of catastrophes from the end of the Ice Age. The biblical flood, Noah's Ark. In Genesis, Noah builds an ark at God's command, preserving pairs of every creature. The rains fall for 40 days, drowning the earth. The ark rests upon Ararat. A dove returns with an olive branch, signalling renewal. For centuries, this story was read as literal history. Even today, expeditions search for remains of Noah's Ark on Ararat. But whether or not a wooden ark survived, the deeper truth is clear. This tale is not isolated. It is one expression of a universal memory. India, Manu and the fish. In India, the ancient Sanskrit texts tell of Manu, the progenitor of humanity. Warned by a divine fish, an incarnation of Vishnu, Manu builds a boat. When the flood comes, the fish guides his vessel to safety atop the Himalayas. Here again, the pattern repeats. Warning, ark, mountain, survival. The motifs are too precise, too widespread to be coincidence. Greece, Deucalion and Pyrrha. The Greeks told of Deucalion, son of Prometheus. Forewarned by his father, he built a chest to survive a flood sent by Zeus to punish humanity. With his wife Pyrrha, he landed on Mount Parnassus. From stones they cast behind them, new humans were born. The echo of the Sumerian and biblical tales is unmistakable. Mesoamerica, the Aztec Sun Ages. In Aztec myth, the world has ended in catastrophe multiple times. The fourth sun ended in flood when waters rose and transformed humans into fish. Survivors clung to logs and drifted. In Mayan tradition, too, there are stories of a flood that ended the age of wooden people, cleansing the earth so humanity could be remade. Australia and the Pacific. Dreamtime and deluge. Among Aboriginal Australians, Dreamtime stories speak of the rainbow serpent raising the seas, swallowing the land, reshaping the coastlines. On Pacific islands, myths tell of great floods and waves that erased earlier lands. Some of these cultures are coastal, their traditions possibly preserving memories of real sea level rise after the last ice age, when oceans swallowed entire continental shelves. Geological evidence, the end of the ice age. Around 12,000 years ago, the world warmed rapidly. Ice sheets melted, seas rose by more than 100 meters, vast coastlines were drowned. Areas that once hosted fertile plains and rivers are now underwater. The Sunda Shelf in Southeast Asia, Doggerland in Northern Europe, the Black Sea Basin before its inundation. Imagine being a coastal people then. Your world, stable for generations, disappears beneath relentless water. Your villages are swallowed. Survivors scatter inland, carrying the trauma with them. Such trauma does not fade. It is told and retold, encoded into myth, carried across centuries. The flood myths, then, are not fanciful. They are a historical memory of this global inundation. Astronomical encodings flood as precession. But there is another layer. Some researchers suggest flood myths encode not only geology but astronomy. In many traditions, the flood marks the end of an age, a transition in the great precessional cycle of 26,000 years. The drowning of a world becomes allegory for the drowning of constellations, the shifting of skies. In this view, flood myths are both memory of water and metaphor for time's great wheel. The reset is not just physical, it is cosmic. Humanity is reminded that ages end, that nothing is permanent, that cycles always bring dissolution before rebirth. Psychological resonance, the fear of water. Beyond geology and astronomy, flood myths resonate because water is archetypal. Jung would say it represents the unconscious, the depths from which dreams and fears arise. To be overwhelmed by flood is to be swallowed by psyche itself. To build an ark is to create a vessel of consciousness that survives the inundation. Thus, flood myths are not only history, they are psychology. They teach resilience, the possibility of rebirth, the necessity of carrying seed through chaos. The Sumerian position. For Sumer, the flood was not abstract. Their cities lay on floodplains between the Tigris and Euphrates, rivers prone to violent inundation. Each spring, waters could both fertilize and destroy. Flood was literal and immediate. To encode it in myth was both practical and cosmic. Yet the universality of the motif suggests the Sumerians were not describing only local events. They were transmitting a memory older than their cities, older than writing, a memory inherited from survivors of a much greater deluge at the end of the Ice Age. Myth a survival code. The flood myths serve a survival purpose. They warn the world can end in water. They instruct, build a vessel, preserve seed, carry life forward. Whether or not a listener fully believes the story, the lesson endures. In times of catastrophe, those who remember the story act. They build, they prepare, they endure. Myth becomes survival code encrypted in narrative. The flood as reset button. The flood is the archetype of reset. It wipes the slate. Civilizations end, memory fragments, survivors rebuild. If history is cyclical, the flood is its punctuation mark. It ends one age and begins another. It explains why beginnings feel like continuations, because each dawn is born from a drowned dusk. Toward the inner archive, we have seen myth as compressed astronomy and geology. But there is another archive still deeper, within ourselves. For just as stone holds fingerprints, just as myth holds memory, our very biology holds scars of catastrophe. DNA carries echoes of past bottlenecks, leaps, and interventions. To move forward, we must shift from the external, stones, stars, myths, to the internal. We must descend into memory etched not in clay or sky, but in flesh and psyche. We now leave behind the stones and the stars. We step away from myths encoded in clay, away from the astronomical calendars carved into temples, away from the monuments aligned to heaven. We turn inward toward the deepest archive of all, memory itself, not the memory of texts which can burn, not the memory of monuments which can erode, not even the memory of myth, which can be distorted by tongue and time. We mean the memory of humanity itself, the collective memory encoded in psyche, and the scars etched into our very biology. But before we explore how memory is preserved, we must first confront its opposite, amnesia. Because something happened, something vast, something shattering, that erased whole chapters of who we are. An event, or a sequence of events, so devastating that it cracked continuity, wiped slates clean, and forced humanity to begin again, as if emerging from a fever dream with only fragments left. This is the amnesia event, the puzzle of forgetting. If civilizations before Sumer existed, if human beings were capable of mathematics, astronomy, and monumental engineering long before the official timeline allows, then why do we not remember? Why do we stumble like children in the ruins, piecing together shards, treating fragments as beginnings, mistaking sequels for origins? The answer cannot be simple laziness. It cannot be mere accident. Knowledge of such scale, if once whole, would not simply fade. It had to be erased. It had to be drowned, burned, scattered. Something acted upon humanity, tearing memory from its roots. Natural catastrophe is amnesia. One possibility is cataclysm. The earth is not gentle. It convulses with earthquakes, buries with volcanoes, redraws coasts with floods. Around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the Ice Age, vast sheets of ice melted. Oceans surged. Rivers drowned valleys. Lowlands where people once lived became seafloors. Imagine living through that. Villages swallowed. Fields erased. Oral traditions fragmented as survivors scattered. The trauma of one generation became myth in the next, then fairy tale, then silence. This geological reset is one candidate for the amnesia event. Memory drowned with land. Entire cultures vanished without record, leaving only the faintest echoes in myth. Cosmic catastrophe is amnesia, but some argue catastrophe came not only from Earth, but from the heavens. The Younger Dryas period, around 12,800 years ago, saw a sudden return to glacial cold, possibly triggered by comet impacts or bursts of cosmic radiation. If fragments of a comet struck Earth, firestorms would have swept continents, dust and ash would have darkened skies, populations would have collapsed. What libraries of knowledge could survive that? Perhaps this is why myths worldwide speak of fire before flood, of stars falling, of gods hurling lightning. Perhaps they encode memory of a cosmic blow, a scar that humanity repressed because to remember was too terrible. Engineered forgetting. There is another darker possibility. What if amnesia was not only natural but engineered? Some traditions speak of gods, or beings, who controlled knowledge, granting fragments to humans while keeping the whole concealed. The Sumerian myths of the Anunnaki, the Greek myths of Prometheus punished for giving fire, the biblical tale of forbidden fruit, all hint at knowledge withheld, memory restricted. Could it be that some intelligence, whether divine, extraterrestrial, or terrestrial elite, deliberately fractured human continuity? Could amnesia itself be an imposed condition, a veil drawn across our eyes to prevent us from remembering who we truly are? Such speculation treads the border of myth and conspiracy, but the pattern is undeniable. Traditions worldwide whisper of knowledge lost not only to disaster, but to deliberate concealment, psychological trauma as amnesia. Even without cataclysm or control, trauma alone can erase memory. When individuals experience overwhelming horror, the psyche sometimes severs recollection, burying pain in the unconscious. Could humanity itself have experienced collective trauma so severe it repressed whole epochs? If floods erased cities, if fire rained from the sky, if millions perished, then perhaps humanity chose forgetting as survival. The pain was too great. Memory became myth, myth became symbol, symbol became silence. Amnesia, then, is not weakness but scar tissue, a protective forgetting that allowed survival at the cost of continuity. The archaeological gaps. Archaeology itself reflects this amnesia. We find sudden leaps. Göbekli Tepe appears with monumental sophistication, then is deliberately buried. Sumer emerges with writing and lore seemingly from nowhere. Egypt rises with perfect pyramids, as though recalling techniques from elsewhere. Between these leaps lie gaps, eras with little evidence, as if whole chapters were ripped from the record. Amnesia is not only psychological, it is physical. The earth itself collaborates with forgetting. Evidence in collective behavior. Even today, humanity behaves like a species with amnesia. We obsess over origins, create myths of firsts, yet are haunted by déjà vu. We are drawn to stories of lost civilizations, Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, as if instinctively sensing we have lived this before. Our fascination with apocalypse films, end-of-world scenarios, dystopian collapses, these are not merely entertainment. They are archetypal echoes, replays of traumas buried deep. We fear the end because we remember the end, though we cannot say when. The Sumerian whisper. Sumer itself encodes memory of amnesia. The king lists speak of reigns tens of thousands of years long before the flood. After the flood, reigns shrink to human scale. This before and after suggests not only catastrophe, but forgetting. The gods, in myth, decide to erase humanity. Only fragments remain. Civilization restarts. The very structure of their narrative mirrors the amnesia event. An earlier chapter torn away, a new chapter begun with fragments. Why the amnesia matters. Why dwell on amnesia? Because to understand the human story, we must account not only for what survives, but for what is missing. Amnesia explains the leaps, the anomalies, the impossibilities. It explains why beginnings feel like continuations, why myths feel like memories, why our history feels incomplete. The amnesia event is the fracture that turned history from a continuous line into broken shards. To deny it is to accept an incomplete narrative. To confront it is to begin piecing together what was lost. A species haunted by absence. We are haunted by what we cannot remember. It surfaces in myths of golden ages, in dreams of floods and fires, in whispers of lost lands beneath the sea. It drives us to dig, to measure, to reconstruct, to question. The very discipline of history is born from amnesia. We seek origins because we cannot remember them. We construct timelines because the real memory is gone. Our yearning for continuity is itself proof of the fracture. Preparing for the descent within, we have identified the amnesia event. But how do we trace what remains? If memory was erased externally by flood, fire, or deliberate concealment, perhaps it survives internally, encoded in DNA, in archetypes, in symbols. To move forward, we must descend further inward. We must read the genome as archive, the psyche as library, the unconscious as museum. For even if surface memory was wiped, echoes remain in our biology and dreams. The next step is to search for genetic echoes, signatures in our DNA that hint at cataclysm, manipulation, or sudden leaps. Memory may be scarred, but scars themselves are records. Our flesh remembers what our minds forget. If myths are the encrypted data of the collective imagination, then DNA is the hard drive of life itself. Every strand of the double helix is a library, every cell a reading room where ancient scripts are replayed. Our flesh is memory, our blood is archive, and within that archive lie scars, leaps, and mysteries, echoes of events that reshaped humanity, perhaps catastrophes or interventions that forced our evolution in directions still unexplained. When we speak of the amnesia event, we must ask, if the mind forgot, did the body remember? The answer, whispered by genetics, is yes. The genome is palimpsest. DNA is a palimpsest, a manuscript written and rewritten over billions of years. Each mutation is an edit, each adaptation a marginal note, each survival a chapter. But just as ancient scribes scraped vellum and overwrote it, evolution too has layers. Beneath our current genome lie traces of forgotten authors. Geneticists, like historians, dig through these layers, and what they find is both astonishing and unsettling. Sudden leaps, inexplicable insertions, and orphan genes that seem to come from nowhere. The enigma of orphan genes. One of the most profound mysteries in genetics is the existence of orphan genes, sequences that appear unique to a particular species, with no apparent evolutionary ancestors. In humans, thousands of orphan genes exist, some of which play crucial roles in brain development, immunity, and even reproduction. They do not fit the neat linear model of gradual mutation and adaptation. They appear suddenly, as though inserted. Where did they come from? Did they emerge spontaneously from non-coding DNA? Were they ancient genes reawakened? Or, more provocatively, could they be remnants of intervention, signatures left by some intelligence that shaped us? The question remains unanswered, but the existence of orphan genes destabilizes the narrative of smooth, gradual evolution. Evolutionary leaps and missing links. The human story, as told by fossils, is filled with gaps. For millions of years, hominins chipped stone and survived in small bands. Then, within a relatively short window, symbolic art, ritual burial, and complex language exploded into being. This cognitive revolution, around 50,000 years ago, is one of the great mysteries of anthropology. Why did the brain, after evolving slowly for millennia, suddenly leap into abstract thought, myth-making, and planning? Some argue it was merely population density or a genetic mutation that spread rapidly. Others suggest something more radical, an outside catalyst, an encounter or event that rewired humanity. Whatever the cause, the leap is undeniable, and the genome may hold its echoes. Bottlenecks as scars. Genetics also reveals evidence of population bottlenecks, moments when humanity nearly went extinct, reducing to small numbers before expanding again. Around 70,000 years ago, the Toba supervolcano in Indonesia erupted catastrophically. Evidence suggests it may have reduced humanity to a few thousand individuals. This near extinction left a genetic scar, a narrowing of diversity that persists today. Such bottlenecks are scars of catastrophe, encoded into our DNA. They remind us that our species has walked the edge of oblivion more than once. They may also explain why myths of floods and fires are universal, because survival through catastrophe is written not only in stories but in chromosomes. Ancient interbreeding, the ghosts in our blood. The genome also carries traces of other humans who are gone. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and perhaps other unknown hominins left fragments of their DNA in us. Modern humans outside Africa carry up to 2% Neanderthal DNA. Populations in Asia carry Denisovan genes. These are genetic fossils, evidence of encounters with other intelligent beings who walked alongside us but vanished. They are ghosts in our blood, whispering of parallel civilizations erased. What knowledge did they hold? Did they too suffer amnesia? Were they wiped by the same catastrophes, or absorbed into us through interbreeding? Their disappearance is part of the great forgetting, but their DNA is a faint echo that resists erasure. The mitochondrial Eve and Y-chromosomal Adam. Genetic studies trace all humans alive today back to a single maternal ancestor, mitochondrial Eve, who lived around 150,000 to 200,000 years ago, and a paternal ancestor, Y-chromosomal Adam, who lived tens of thousands of years later. These terms are symbolic. They do not mean one woman or man alone existed, but that our unbroken maternal and paternal lines converge upon them. Still, the symbolism is profound. Humanity is a single family, descended from a few survivors of ancient bottlenecks. Perhaps this is why so many myths speak of first parents, Adam and Eve, Manu, Yima, Purusa. The genome itself confirms the archetype. We are the children of few, haunted by near extinction. Epigenetics, trauma remembered in flesh. Beyond genes themselves lies epigenetics, the study of how experiences such as trauma or famine alter the way genes are expressed. Studies show that trauma can leave epigenetic marks that pass to descendants. Children of Holocaust survivors, of famine victims, of war survivors carry chemical signatures of their ancestors' suffering. If trauma can echo across 2 or 3 generations, could cataclysms, floods, famines, cosmic fires echo across thousands? Perhaps part of our unease, our obsession with apocalypse, our myths of catastrophe, are not only cultural but biological. We carry scars not only in stories but in gene expression. The possibility of intervention. There is a provocative thread running through all this. The sudden leaps, the orphan genes, the cognitive revolution, the myths of gods descending to teach humanity, do they suggest intervention? The Sumerians believed knowledge was given by the Anunnaki. The Dogon of Mali spoke of visitors from Sirius who taught them of the stars. Nearly every culture has myths of gods or beings who arrived, bestowed knowledge, and departed. Could these myths encode real encounters, interventions that left genetic as well as cultural traces? Could orphan genes be signatures of such contact, edits in the genome by hands not entirely human? Mainstream science rejects such speculation, but the anomalies remain. The leaps, the scars, the sudden appearances demand explanation. Whether natural, divine, or engineered, the genome bears witness to something extraordinary. DNA as the new myth. Today, in laboratories, we map the genome. We read the script of life base by base, as if unrolling a scroll written by evolution itself. But perhaps we're not the first to do so. Perhaps earlier civilizations glimpsed the same mystery in different form, through geometry, myth, or ritual. DNA itself has a geometry, the double helix spiraling like serpents entwined. No wonder serpents appear in myths as symbols of wisdom, eternity, and life. The caduceus, with its twin snakes coiling around a staff, is not only a medical symbol, but an uncanny echo of the helix. Did the ancients intuit what we now measure? If so, then myth, symbol, and DNA converge. The serpent in the garden, the feathered serpent, the cosmic serpent, all may be archetypal memories of the very code of life. The Sumerian connection. The Sumerians spoke of humans fashioned from clay, given life by the breath of gods. On the surface, this is myth. But clay contains the building blocks of biochemistry, silicates, minerals, catalysts. In modern labs, scientists speculate life may have arisen on clay surfaces. Did the Sumerians encode a memory of genetic intervention, cloaked in the language of myth? Did their gods symbolize the forces or perhaps beings that altered humanity's code? Whether literal or symbolic, their stories align with what genetics now reveals. Humanity was shaped not by smooth gradualism, but by sudden interventions, scars, and leaps. Toward the psyche, we have seen that DNA remembers catastrophes in bottlenecks, interventions in orphan genes, ghosts in interbreeding, trauma in epigenetics. Memory survives even when consciousness forgets. But there is another archive even deeper than genes, the psyche itself. For what cannot be preserved in chromosomes may still echo in dreams, symbols, and archetypes. To descend further into the memory of humanity, we must now enter the collective unconscious, the realm where myth is not only cultural but psychological, where symbols are not inventions but eternal patterns rising from the depths. The stone remembers through mass. The stars remember through rhythm. The genome remembers through code. But there is another archive, one far more elusive, yet no less enduring. It is the memory carried in psyche, in dream, in symbol. This archive is invisible to excavation. You cannot unearth it with spade or brush, yet it is everywhere, woven into ritual, art, and imagination. It whispers in fairy tales, glimmers in visions, returns unbidden in nightmares. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious, the deep reservoir of archetypes, universal patterns that shape human experience. Whether born from biology or from forgotten history, these archetypes are the shadows of humanity's long journey. They are the fragments of memory too deep to erase, too old to name, yet too powerful to ignore. The nature of archetypes. Jung argued that archetypes are not invented by cultures. They are discovered. They emerge spontaneously, recurring across civilizations and epochs. The Great Mother, the hero, the trickster, the flood, the serpent, the world tree, these motifs appear universally, even among people separated by oceans and centuries. How can this be? Jung believed archetypes were embedded in the structure of the psyche itself, inherited like instincts. Just as birds know how to build nests without instruction, humans carry psychic blueprints that generate stories, gods, and symbols. But there is another possibility. Perhaps archetypes are not only psychological but historical. Perhaps they are encoded memories of real events, catastrophes, or encounters so ancient they can no longer be recalled consciously. In this view, archetypes are the fossilized echoes of history re-emerging as dream. The flood archetype revisited. We have already seen the flood as geology, as myth, as DNA bottleneck. But it is also psychological. Dreams of drowning are among the most universal. Anxiety often takes the form of rising water, of being swallowed by an overwhelming tide. Why should this image recur in the psyche of children who never knew catastrophe? Perhaps because at some deep level, humanity still carries the memory of the world-drowning deluge. It surfaces in dreams not as history, but as archetype. The psyche remembers what the mind forgot. The serpent as archetype. The serpent, too, coils through the collective unconscious. Children fear snakes instinctively. Myths exalt or demonize them. They guard thresholds, offer knowledge, embody cycles. Biologists argue this instinct is evolutionary. Early humans survived by fearing snakes. But does this alone explain the serpent's exalted role in myth, its association with eternity, wisdom, and DNA-like coils? Perhaps the serpent archetype encodes multiple memories: the terror of venom, the renewal of shedding skin, the spiral of galaxies, the helix of genes, all coiled together, all surfacing as one universal symbol: the hero and the cosmic cycle. The hero's journey, found everywhere from Gilgamesh to Star Wars, is more than narrative convenience. It is archetype. The hero departs the known world, descends into trials, faces death, and returns transformed. This mirrors not only human maturation but cosmic cycles: the sun setting into darkness and returning at dawn, Venus vanishing and re-emerging, civilizations falling and rising. The archetype may encode the collective memory of cyclical history, the amnesia of collapse and the rebirth of continuity. Every time we tell a hero story, we unconsciously rehearse the great cycle of humanity itself. Dreams as fractured memory. Dreams are the nightly theatre where archetypes emerge. Jung called them compensations, balancing conscious life. But they may also be fragments of older memory. How many times have humans dreamed of falling, drowning, being chased by fire, wandering through ruined cities? These are not random. They are echoes of past traumas, inherited through psyche as well as biology. The psyche is a stubborn archivist. Even when flood and fire erase civilizations, even when amnesia wipes conscious continuity, the psyche still dreams the fragments. And in those fragments, ancient memory endures. The Sumerian shadow. Sumerian myths are saturated with archetypes. The hero Gilgamesh seeking immortality, the goddess Inanna descending and returning, the flood survivor Utnapishtim, the serpent that steals the plant of eternal life. These are not just stories of one culture. They are archetypal dramas, repeating across civilizations. Gilgamesh is echoed in Hercules, in Odysseus, in King Arthur, in every seeker who journeys into shadow. Inanna's descent is echoed in Persephone, in Isis, in the Virgin Mary's sorrows. Sumer is not unique. It is the first preserved expression of universal archetypes. But these archetypes themselves may be fragments of forgotten memory, surfacing as myth because conscious history was erased. Trauma and the shadow. Jung taught that the psyche represses what it cannot bear. This repressed material forms the shadow, the dark, unacknowledged part of self. Collectively, humanity too has a shadow, the memory of catastrophes, extinctions and collapses. We repress these because they terrify, but they return in archetype, in myth, in dream. The shadow is the amnesia event buried in psyche. The collective unconscious is the fractured archive where its echoes still survive. Archetypes as survival software. Why preserve these archetypes? Because they are useful. They teach through symbol what cannot be taught through direct memory. The flood myth warns us of deluge. The hero myth prepares us for transformation. The serpent archetype encodes danger and wisdom simultaneously. Archetypes are survival software, running beneath consciousness. Even when history is forgotten, the archetypes endure, guiding behavior through story, ritual, and dream. The collective unconscious as proof of continuity. Skeptics argue archetypes are simply convergent psychology. But the sheer precision of parallels, the flood, the hero, the serpent, the descent, the world tree, suggests more than accident. The collective unconscious may be evidence of continuity deeper than culture. It may be the true memory of humanity, surviving catastrophes not in books or stones but in psyche itself. If so, then every dream is an archaeological dig. Every myth is a fossil. Every ritual is a reenactment of something older, something lost. Toward the language of symbols. If archetypes are the psyche's way of preserving memory, then symbols are its alphabet. Symbols are not arbitrary. They are carriers of meaning across time and culture. To read symbols is to decode the psyche's archive. The cross, the circle, the spiral, The tree. These are not inventions. They are primordial expressions. They recur because they are deeper than thought. They are memory itself, clothed in form. To move forward, we must examine this symbolic language more closely, for within it lies the key to unlocking the deeper layers of forgotten history, the lost language of symbols that can reactivate memory buried for millennia. If myths are the encrypted stories of humanity, then symbols are their alphabet. Symbols are the psyche's shorthand, its way of carrying immense weight in a single sign. They are at once universal and personal, simple and profound, obvious and elusive. They are the vocabulary of the collective unconscious, and the carriers of memory across time. Unlike words which must be learned, symbols speak directly. A circle, a spiral, a cross. These require no translation. They resonate in the marrow. They stir something older than language, something buried yet alive. And if humanity truly suffered amnesia, if our earliest chapters were torn out, then symbols may be the fragments that remain, tiny glyphs of continuity scattered across cultures, waiting to be decoded. The circle, eternity without beginning or end. The circle is perhaps the oldest symbol. It appears in Paleolithic caves, in sun disks, in wheels and shields. Its meaning is immediate, wholeness, eternity, the cycle without beginning or end. To draw a circle is to grasp the cosmos as endless. To walk in circles in ritual is to reenact the turning of stars. To build circles of stone, Stonehenge, Avebury, the medicine wheels of North America, is to anchor cosmic cycles into Earth. The circle survives in every culture because it is not invention but recognition. The sky itself is a dome. The horizon itself is a ring. The sun and moon themselves are circles. To forget the circle would be to forget existence itself. The spiral, the path of becoming. From the coils of shells to the arms of galaxies, the spiral recurs in nature. Ancient peoples carved spirals into stone, at Newgrange in Ireland, at petroglyph sites across the Americas, at megaliths in Malta. The spiral is not static. It moves. It is growth, expansion, evolution. It is time unfolding not in a line, but in a curve that circles yet progresses. For a culture traumatized by cataclysm, the spiral offered hope. Collapse is not the end, but part of a greater unfolding. We return, but never to the same point. We rise, cycle by cycle, towards something higher. The cross union of opposites. Long before Christianity, the cross was sacred. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerian dingir symbol, a star-like cross, signified divinity. In Native American traditions, the cross within a circle represented the four directions. In Egypt, the ankh, a cross topped with a loop, signified life. The cross is the meeting of opposites, vertical and horizontal, heaven and earth, time and space. It is the intersection of cycles, the axis where opposites become whole. The Christian cross, inheriting these older resonances, became the supreme symbol of death and rebirth. But its power lies deeper than any one tradition. The cross is universal because it encodes the structure of experience itself. The tree, the axis of worlds. The world tree appears everywhere. Yggdrasil in Norse myth, the tree of life in Genesis, the Ashvatha tree in Hinduism, the saber tree in Mayan cosmology. Always the tree unites realms, roots in the underworld, trunk in the world of humans, branches in heaven. The tree is both biological and cosmic. It grows upward, yet is rooted. It is mortal, yet renews itself each spring. Its rings record time. Its form mirrors the branching of rivers, lungs, neurons. The tree is humanity's oldest symbol of connection. To dream of the world tree is to dream of continuity between forgotten ages, of memory stretching from past to future. The serpent, knowledge and eternity. We have seen the serpent already as archetype, but as symbol it deserves emphasis. Coiled, it becomes the spiral. Biting its tail, it becomes the Ouroboros, the circle of eternity. Twinned, it becomes the caduceus, symbol of healing and of DNA itself. The serpent appears on Sumerian seals, on Egyptian crowns, on Mesoamerican temples. Always it guards thresholds, between life and death, between ignorance and knowledge. Perhaps the serpent was memory itself, a symbol of wisdom that must be both feared and revered. Its persistence across cultures suggests it carried meaning too deep to forget, too central to erase. The labyrinth journey to the center, from Crete's Minotaur labyrinth to Native American medicine wheels, From medieval cathedral floors to Hopi emergence myths, the labyrinth recurs. It is the symbol of journey inward, of descent into shadow, of the spiral path to the centre of self. The labyrinth is also a mnemonic. Walking it in ritual engraves memory into body. Each turn, each reversal mirrors life's path, confusing, circular, yet always moving toward a centre. Perhaps labyrinths preserved not only spiritual wisdom, but fragments of forgotten history. The truth that humanity itself has walked this pattern before, through collapse and rebirth. Symbols as compressed memory. What unites these symbols is their universality. Circle, spiral, cross, tree, serpent, labyrinth, found everywhere, independent of contact. This suggests they are not inventions but inheritances. They are compressed memory packets, archetypes distilled into form. Like DNA, they are codes, carrying survival wisdom, cosmological knowledge, historical trauma. Symbols endure because they bypass rational mind. They lodge in psyche. A circle can be remembered even when alphabets are lost. A serpent can evoke eternity even when myths are forgotten. Symbols are humanity's hard drive, immune to erasure by flood or fire. The language we have forgotten. Modernity has lost fluency in this symbolic language. We read literally, not symbolically. We dismiss symbols as decoration, superstition, or coincidence. But to the ancients, symbols were precise tools, carriers of reality itself. To inscribe a circle was to invoke eternity. To carve a serpent was to summon knowledge. To build a cross-shaped temple was to align heaven and earth. By losing this symbolic literacy, we have deepened our amnesia. We hold the fragments, but cannot read them. We see symbols everywhere, on flags, logos, architecture. Yet their deeper resonance is mute to us. Jung's warning. Jung believed modern humanity, by repressing archetypes, risks being overwhelmed by them. What is unintegrated in psyche returns as pathology. What is forgotten returns as obsession. Our obsession with apocalyptic stories, with alien contact, with hidden histories, all may be symptoms of repressed archetypes struggling to surface. They are the lost language demanding to be remembered, pressing upon us through art, dream, and imagination. The Sumerian symbolic legacy. The Sumerians were among the first to fix symbols into writing. Their cuneiform wedge marks are not just script but echoes of symbolic form. The star for divinity, the serpent for wisdom, the tree for fertility. These appear on seals and tablets, carrying symbolic resonance as much as literal meaning. Even their mathematics was symbolic, base 60, echoing cosmic cycles. Even their myths were symbolic, gods as planets, battles as astronomical events. Sumer shows us the transition from pure symbol to language. Yet even as they invented writing, they never abandoned symbol. They knew symbol was deeper, more enduring, toward a reactivation of memory. If we relearn this symbolic language, we may begin to recover what was lost. Each symbol is a key. Each archetype is a doorway. By meditating on them, by recognizing their universality, we can reconnect with the deeper strata of memory. The amnesia may not be absolute. The psyche still holds fragments. Symbols are the clues left behind, breadcrumbs through the forest of forgetting. If we follow them, we may find ourselves remembering, not in detail but in essence, the chapters torn from history. A pause before descent. We have now explored myth and symbol, the compressed archives of humanity. We have seen how they preserve memory of floods, cycles, catastrophes, and cosmic truths. But there is one more archive, subtler still. Dreams. For in dreams, symbols come alive, archetypes play their dramas, forgotten ages resurface in phantoms. Dreams are where memory becomes personal, where the collective unconscious seeps into individual night. To move deeper into the descent, we must pause with the dream. We must listen to its whispers, not as idle fantasy, but as recurring memory, humanity's nightly rehearsal of its ancient forgetting and its eternal longing to remember. We have journeyed through stone and sky, through DNA and myth, through the symbols that whisper from every culture. We have begun to see that what we call history is not a straight line, but a spiral of memory and forgetting. Now, before we move deeper, we must pause, not to add more evidence, not to stack more stones upon the ziggurat of speculation, but to breathe, to listen, to descend into the quiet where memory and dream overlap. Because dreams are not idle. They are rehearsals, rehearsals of things we cannot quite say, rehearsals of events we may not consciously remember but cannot escape. Dreams are where the psyche rehearses history itself. The dreamer's archive. Every night, without exception, we dream. The images may fade with dawn, but the act remains. To dream is to enter the inner archive where fragments of past, present, and something beyond mingle freely. Jung taught us that dreams are not random. They are compensations, messages from the unconscious, but they are also replays, scenes rehearsed, traumas reenacted, archetypes staged like dramas upon the theatre of sleep. And if the collective unconscious is real, then dreams are not only personal, they are collective rehearsals, fragments of the great story reenacted in miniature. The flood in dreams. Ask yourself, how often have you dreamed of rising water, of being swept away, of running from waves, of drowning? Even those who live far from coasts report such dreams. Why? The flood is more than metaphor. It is a recurring dream because it is a recurring memory. Humanity once drowned, and the psyche has never forgotten. We carry this trauma into sleep, replaying it across generations. When you dream of water rising, you may not simply be processing stress. You may be unconsciously remembering the flood of the world, encoded in your psyche as surely as in myth. The fire in dreams. So too with fire. How many dream of firestorms, of the sky ablaze, of the sun darkened by smoke? These are archetypal nightmares, common across cultures. Perhaps they recall the younger Dryas, when comet fragments may have ignited continents. Perhaps they echo the firestorms of volcanic eruptions or the devastation of war. Whatever their origin, fire dreams are part of our shared archive. They remind us of endings we no longer name. The ruins and dreams. Another recurring dream. Walking through ruins, ancient cities, broken pillars, corridors of forgotten temples. Many report such dreams, though they have never visited ruins in waking life. Could this be imagination? Of course, but perhaps it is more. Perhaps it is the unconscious remembering. Perhaps our ancestors walked through real ruins after cataclysm, searching for shelter among broken stones, carrying that image into the bloodstream of psyche. In dreams, we wander through ruins because humanity itself has wandered there again and again after every collapse. The flight and the fall. The dream of flight is almost universal. To soar, to rise above, to escape gravity. This is both liberation and memory. Birds once symbolized the gods. To fly is to ascend to heaven, to return to what was lost. But paired with flight is the dream of falling. Always falling, endlessly falling. Could this be a symbol of the fall itself? The descent from some higher age into amnesia, into mortality, into the broken continuity of history. Perhaps every dream of falling is a fragment of humanity's greater fall, our loss of continuity, our exile from memory. Dreams as archetypal echoes. If we map these recurring dreams, flood, fire, ruins, falling, we find they align with the great traumas and symbols of myth. The psyche replays in miniature what myth encodes in story. This is why dreams matter. They are not random neurons firing. They are echoes of the collective unconscious rehearsing its memory. They are the nightly descent into the underworld of psyche, where fragments of forgotten epochs still whisper. The meditative pause. So let us pause. Imagine yourself reclining beneath the night sky of ancient Sumer. The Tigris and Euphrates flow nearby, their waters reflecting stars. The ziggurat rises in the distance, a stairway for gods. Close your eyes, listen to the silence broken only by wind and water, then allow your mind to drift as the ancients did. Let the dream come. Perhaps you see water rising, swallowing fields. Perhaps you see fire from the sky, streaking comets. Perhaps you see ruins, broken temples on shores long forgotten. Perhaps you see a serpent coiling, offering wisdom or death. Do not dismiss it. For in these images your psyche may be remembering what history forgot. The recurring dream as teacher. Why do dreams repeat? Because repetition is how memory persists. When conscious memory fails, the unconscious repeats until it cannot be ignored. The recurring dream is the unconscious demanding attention. It says, remember. Do not forget what your ancestors saw. Do not forget the cycles that shaped you. If we listen, dreams become teachers. They remind us of floods, of fires, of collapses, so that when cycles return, we are not wholly unprepared. Sumer and the dreaming mind. The Sumerians themselves valued dreams. Kings and priests recorded dreams as omens. Gilgamesh dreams of falling stars and axes, symbols of destiny. Inanna dreams of descent and resurrection. Dreams were not private in Sumer. They were messages from gods, from ancestors, from the deeper order of the cosmos. The Sumerians knew what we forget. Dreams are archives, not fantasies. The bridge between inner and outer. At this pause in our journey, we see how all the layers connect. Stone encodes memory externally. Myth encodes memory collectively. DNA encodes memory biologically. Dreams encode memory personally. Together, they form a bridge between outer and inner, past and present, conscious and unconscious. To walk that bridge is to begin remembering, not the details, which are lost, but the essence, which survives in image and archetype, preparing for the final descent. This meditative pause is not an ending but a breath before the next movement. We have looked outward at monuments and myths. We have looked inward at psyche and dream. Now we must synthesize. For history is not only about the past, it is about cycles, and cycles return. The flood, the fire, the collapse, they are not only memories but warnings. To understand them is to prepare for the present. Before we rise into synthesis, we must complete the descent. We must explore how civilizations themselves cycle, how memory is erased, how forgetting is enforced. For only then can we face the question, where do we stand now? We have descended into memory, the fractured record of stone, the encoded myths of catastrophe, the genetic scars of survival, the recurring archetypes of dream. Each archive whispers the same unsettling truth. Human history is not linear. It is cyclical. Civilizations do not march in a straight line toward progress. They rise, they flourish, they collapse, and they are forgotten. Each age believes itself unique, the pinnacle of time, yet each age echoes those before it. We mistake the spiral for a line. We mistake the refrain for a first verse. Now it is time to synthesize, to weave together the fragments into a single tapestry, to step back and see the pattern, even if only in outline. This is the grand synthesis, the cycle of civilizations, the myth of progress. Modern humanity worships progress. We imagine history as ascent, from primitive huts to skyscrapers, from superstition to science, from stone tools to satellites. But progress is a myth. It is true that we accumulate knowledge, but it is equally true that we lose it. The ancients may not have had electricity, but they had astronomy of astonishing precision. They may not have built rockets, but they raised stones we still cannot explain. They may not have left us their names, but they left monuments aligned with stars and encoded with geometry we are only beginning to rediscover. Progress is not a line, it is a cycle where brilliance blooms, collapses, and is forgotten, only to bloom again. The Sumerian example. Sumer is the earliest first civilization we can read. Writing, law, irrigation, mathematics. These arrived with astonishing completeness. But even in their own records, the Sumerians admitted they were not first. Their king lists describe ages before the flood, when rulers reigned for tens of thousands of years. To modern historians, these are exaggerations, but to the Sumerians they were memory. They knew they were inheritors, not initiators. They knew civilizations had risen and fallen before. Their myths of gods teaching knowledge, of floods erasing worlds, of cycles of kingship, all point to an older story they could not fully recall. Sumer is a chapter, not a beginning. Egypt, another cycle. After Sumer, Egypt rose. Its pyramids were not crude beginnings, but perfected monuments. Its astronomy, its art, its theology, all appeared with maturity. The same pattern, sudden brilliance, as if memory had returned, then slow decline. Egypt lasted millennia, but even it collapsed, absorbed into Greece and Rome, its language forgotten until deciphered only in the last 2 centuries. Imagine a civilization that endured longer than any modern nation, yet was lost so completely that its hieroglyphs became mute decoration for nearly 2,000 years. Egypt shows us, even the greatest civilizations can vanish into silence. The Greeks and Romans, Greece inherited fragments from Egypt and Sumer, translated them into philosophy, art and science. Rome inherited Greece, built empire, spread law. Both rose, flourished and collapsed. What followed was not smooth continuation, but the Dark Ages, centuries when knowledge receded, libraries burned, cities emptied. Only fragments survived, preserved in monasteries, in the Islamic world, in oral tradition. It was a cycle: brilliance, collapse, forgetting, rebirth. The Renaissance was not invention but recovery, a reawakening of memory buried in manuscripts and ruins. Lost civilizations beneath the waves. Archaeology has begun to reveal drowned cities, Dwarka in India, Yonaguni off Japan, ruins beneath the Mediterranean. Sea levels rose at the end of the Ice Age, swallowing coastlines where people once lived. If these were civilizations, they are erased almost completely. What remains are whispers, flood myths, anomalous artifacts, unexplained symbols. Another cycle. Brilliance drowned, memory erased, fragments surviving in myth. The universal pattern. From these examples, a pattern emerges. Emergence. A culture arises, often with sudden brilliance, as though drawing on forgotten memory. Flourishing, knowledge accumulates, art and science advance, monuments are built. Catastrophe or decline. War, famine, plague, natural disaster or internal corruption. Collapse follows. Amnesia. Knowledge is lost, texts destroyed, symbols forgotten. Survivors inherit fragments without context. Rebirth. From fragments, a new culture emerges, believing itself first. This is the cycle of civilizations. It is not theory, but pattern, repeated across continents and ages. The fractals of collapse. This cycle is fractal. It operates at multiple scales. Entire civilizations collapse, but so too do dynasties, kingdoms, even families. The rhythm repeats in smaller loops, mirroring the larger pattern. Like the spiral, it circles endlessly, each turn echoing those before, each collapse seeding the next birth. The role of catastrophe. Why collapse? Because catastrophe is the great editor. Flood, fire, famine, invasion, these erase memory, they shatter continuity. Yet catastrophe is also renewal. It clears the slate for rebirth. Without it, civilizations stagnate. With it, they die and return transformed. The cycle depends on catastrophe, painful though it is. This may be why myths preserve catastrophe so obsessively. The flood, the fire, the fall. These are not just memories but reminders that collapse is inevitable, and survival depends on preparing to carry fragments through the darkness. The psychological dimension. On the individual level, the psyche mirrors the cycle. We rise, flourish, collapse into shadow and return renewed. Initiation rites mirrored this. The initiate died symbolically and was reborn. Civilizations undergo the same rite at scale. Collapse is their death. Amnesia is their burial. Rebirth is their initiation. The cycle of civilizations is the macrocosm of the individual psyche. The synthesis of archives. Now let us weave together all the archives. Stone. Monuments are the fossils of cycles, surviving collapse, whispering of forgotten brilliance. Myth encodes catastrophes and cycles, preserving memory symbolically. DNA bears scars of bottlenecks, interbreeding, and trauma, evidence of survival through collapse. Psyche. Dreams and archetypes replay forgotten events, preserving continuity at the unconscious level. Together they confirm the synthesis. Humanity lives in cycles. We are not the first. We are not the pinnacle. We are participants in a rhythm older than history, perhaps older than humanity itself. The Sumerian place in the cycle. Where does Sumer fit? Sumer is the re-emergence after a flood. It is the rebirth after amnesia. Its brilliance was the flowering of fragments inherited, fragments carried through catastrophe, fragments encoded in myth and psyche. The Sumerians themselves knew this. Their king lists, their flood myths, their gods of wisdom, all testify that they saw themselves as inheritors. They lived within the cycle, not above it. The grand synthesis stated, so we state it clearly, the Earth has hosted multiple cycles of civilization and collapse. Each age rises, flourishes and falls, its memory fractured by catastrophe. Survivors inherit fragments, symbols, myths, scars in DNA, archetypes in psyche. These fragments seed the next age, which mistakes them for beginnings. Thus, history is not linear progress, but cyclical remembrance and forgetting. This is the grand synthesis. The implication for us. If the cycle is real, then we must ask, where are we in it now? Are we in flourishing? Are we on the cusp of collapse? Are we preparing for amnesia or for rebirth? The signs of the past, hubris, overreach, ecological strain, weapons of unimaginable power, all are visible in our present. The cycle may be repeating even now, but awareness itself is power. To know the cycle is to begin breaking free of it. To remember what was forgotten is to resist amnesia. To carry knowledge consciously through collapse is to alter destiny. Transition to the next stage. We have now seen the grand synthesis, but a question remains. Why don't we remember more? Why are the beginnings always torn away? Is forgetting natural, an erosion of time, or deliberate, a veil drawn by those who benefit from ignorance? To answer, we must turn next to the veil of forgetting. We must ask, was our amnesia an accident of catastrophe, or was it engineered, enforced, imposed? Only then can we face the deeper question. If cycles always return, where do we stand in the cycle today? We have reached the heart of the paradox. If the rise and fall of civilizations is cyclical, if humanity has walked this path before, then why do we not remember? Why is every new beginning treated as the first? Why are we as a species haunted by amnesia? This is the veil of forgetting, the great obscuration that hides earlier chapters of our story. It is the silence between cycles, the erasure that turns memory into myth, the fog that blinds us to continuity. But what draws this veil? Is it only the work of nature, time, flood and fire? Or is it something darker, deliberate, an enforced amnesia, imposed by those who benefit from our forgetting? Natural erosion, the cataclysm hypothesis. The simplest explanation is cataclysm. The Earth is a restless archive. It erases as much as it preserves. Floods submerge coastlines, leaving cities beneath hundreds of feet of water. Earthquakes topple monuments, grinding them into rubble. Volcanoes bury towns beneath ash. Climate shifts redraw ecosystems, forcing migrations that scatter cultures and dissolve continuity. And above all, time. Stone erodes, wood rots, papyrus crumbles. Without deliberate preservation, artifacts vanish within millennia. Thus, even without conspiracy, the veil descends naturally. The record of earlier ages may simply be gone, erased by geology itself. Yet natural erosion alone does not explain everything. Some erasures feel too deliberate, too precise. Libraries burned, records destroyed, knowledge hidden. Here the veil takes on the shape of human hand. The human hand, the politics of forgetting. History is written by victors, and victors decide what survives. When new regimes rise, they destroy the monuments of the old. Pharaohs chisel out rival names, conquerors burn temples, priests declare heresies and erase them from record. The act is deliberate. To control the past is to control the future. Examples are many. The Library of Alexandria, once said to house hundreds of thousands of scrolls destroyed by fire, whether through accident, negligence, or intention. The burning of Mayan codices by Spanish friars, reducing entire cosmologies to ash. The suppression of Gnostic gospels by early church councils, rewriting spiritual history into orthodox form. The Damnatio Memoriae of Rome, where emperors' faces were chiseled away, their deeds erased. These are not natural losses. They are deliberate forgettings. Knowledge destroyed not by flood or fire of the earth, but by the fire of ideology. The sacred monopoly. Another form of veil is the monopoly of sacred knowledge. Many traditions speak of secret teachings, wisdom reserved for initiates, withheld from the masses. The Egyptian priesthood held astronomical and mathematical knowledge hidden within temple walls. The Pythagoreans swore secrecy on their geometrical mysteries. Medieval alchemists encoded their knowledge in riddles and symbols, legible only to the initiated. Secret societies, the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, the Templars, claimed descent from ancient wisdom traditions, passing fragments in coded form. If these lineages are real, then forgetting was not total. It was enforced, selective. Knowledge was preserved in shadows, hidden from the majority, released only in fragments. But why? Was secrecy meant to protect dangerous knowledge from misuse? Or was it a tool of control, ensuring that only a few could wield the power of continuity while the rest remained blind? Myth of the forbidden knowledge. Many myths warn against knowledge itself. In Genesis, eating from the tree of knowledge brings exile. In Greek myth, Prometheus steals fire and is punished eternally. In Mesopotamian myth, Enki grants wisdom against the will of higher gods. The message is consistent. Knowledge is forbidden, controlled, dangerous. Humanity's amnesia may not only be the result of forgetting, it may be the result of prohibition. If so, then the veil is not passive. It is active enforcement, encoded in myth itself. Do not ask. Do not remember. Do not eat the fruit of memory. The cataclysm versus the cover-up. So which is it? Did we forget because nature erased the record? Or did we forget because humans, or gods, covered it up? The answer may be both. Catastrophe destroys. but cover-ups ensure the fragments that survive remain illegible. Floods erase coastlines, but priests burn the codices. Volcanoes bury cities, but conquerors suppress rival myths. Thus the veil is woven from two threads, the impartial violence of nature and the deliberate violence of power. Together they ensure that each age begins in partial darkness, inheriting only fragments. The psychological dimension of the veil. There is another layer, psychology. Trauma itself creates forgetting. A civilization scarred by catastrophe may choose to repress memory, just as individuals repressed unbearable pain. This repression then becomes myth. The catastrophe is retold symbolically: floods, fire, giants, gods, because literal memory is too terrible. The veil is not only imposed from outside, but woven from within by psyche itself. Thus, forgetting may be both natural, political, and psychological. The earth erases, rulers censor, and the psyche represses. The result is the same: amnesia. Sumer and the veil. Even Sumer, the first civilization we can read, lived beneath the veil. Their king lists spoke of antediluvian ages, reigns stretching tens of thousands of years. Their myths admitted a great flood erased what came before. Their gods were said to have descended, bringing knowledge, but withholding other secrets. Sumer did not see itself as first. It saw itself as inheritor of fragments. Even at the dawn of writing, the veil was already in place. The veil in our own time. We must also ask, does the veil still operate today? Are there truths hidden from us deliberately? We know knowledge is still destroyed, controlled, suppressed. Archives vanish in war. Research disappears into classified vaults. Sacred traditions guard secrets still. The politics of forgetting is alive. And beyond politics, what about technology? The more digital our world becomes, the more fragile it is. What happens if servers fail, if power grids collapse, if data erodes? How long would it take for our own age to vanish into myth? Perhaps the veil is not only past, it is present and future. Why the veil matters? Why does it matter whether forgetting was natural or deliberate? Because the difference changes our responsibility. If forgetting is natural, then our task is preservation, learning how to carry memory through catastrophe. If forgetting is deliberate, then our task is resistance, challenging those who monopolize and erase knowledge. Either way, awareness is power. To know the veil exists is to begin piercing it. A glimpse beyond the veil. Fragments still survive. Myths, symbols, ruins, genetic scars, dreams, all are cracks in the veil. Through them we glimpse what was lost. We see the cycles repeating. We sense the amnesia that binds us. But there is hope. For the first time in history, humanity has global memory systems, printing, digital archives, networks. We may yet learn to preserve across collapse. We may yet pierce the veil deliberately, carrying knowledge forward with intention. The question is, will we? Transition forward. We have confronted the veil of forgetting. We have seen that amnesia is woven from cataclysm, cover-up, and repression. We have acknowledged that every age begins blind, inheriting fragments from before. Now we must turn to the present, for if cycles return, then where are we in the cycle today? Are we flourishing at our height, or already trembling at the edge of collapse? Are we inheritors of wisdom, or soon to be survivors of forgetting? The next step is to mirror the pattern upon ourselves, to ask not only what the ancients forgot, but what we ourselves are in danger of forgetting. We have traced the rise and fall of civilizations across time. We have seen monuments that whisper of lost engineers, myths that encode floods and fires, genomes that bear scars of bottlenecks, and dreams that replay traumas too ancient to name. We have pierced the veil of forgetting, recognizing that amnesia is both natural and engineered. Now we must turn the mirror upon ourselves. If history is cyclical, if civilizations rise and fall in repeating spirals, then where are we in that cycle today? Are we at the height of flourishing, or already on the downward curve? Are we preparing for rebirth, or stumbling into collapse? This is not idle speculation. It is the most urgent question we can ask. Recognizing the pattern, every civilization believes itself eternal at its height. The Egyptians, building pyramids aligned to stars, did not foresee their language becoming mute for 2 millennia. The Romans, ruling from Britain to Mesopotamia, did not imagine their empire collapsing into ruins scavenged for stone. The Maya, measuring Venus with precision, did not foresee their cities swallowed by jungle. And yet collapse came, always. The patterns of collapse are familiar. Ecological strain, overreach, inequality, corruption, external invasion, natural catastrophe. Each civilization thought it unique. Each repeated the same cycle. If we are honest, we must admit we see these signs in ourselves. The modern height, humanity today stands at a peak of technological and global integration unmatched in history. We can split atoms, map genomes, send probes to the edge of the solar system. We have global communication, instant memory, knowledge at fingertips. In the cycle of civilizations, this is the flourishing stage, the apex of brilliance when everything seems possible. But it is also the most dangerous stage, when hubris blinds us to fragility. The ecological warning, one of the most common threads in past collapses, is ecological strain. Civilizations grow beyond the carrying capacity of their land. Soil erodes, forests vanish, rivers are diverted until they dry. When ecology collapses, culture follows. Today, we see warning signs everywhere. Climate change, deforestation, extinction of species, rising seas, poisoned waters. The Earth is strained under the weight of billions, under technologies that multiply impact. History whispers, this is how collapses begin. The inequality trap. Another pattern is inequality. Wealth and power concentrate in few hands. Elites insulate themselves, blind to the suffering below. The social contract fractures. This too is visible now. Vast wealth divides. Billions struggling while a few accumulate unimaginable power. The symptoms of decay, alienation, unrest, polarization spread. Rome rotted not from without but within. Inequality hollowed it. We should not assume we are immune. The hubris of knowledge. The ancients too believed themselves masters of knowledge. Yet each civilization lost wisdom it once held. The knowledge of how to build Baalbek's foundations. The secret of Damascus steel. The astronomical precision encoded in temples forgotten for centuries. We too may lose what we take for granted. Our knowledge is fragile, stored on servers, dependent on electricity, vulnerable to disaster. A solar flare, a cyber attack, a collapse of infrastructure, and entire archives vanish. We believe digital immortality protects us. In truth, it may accelerate our forgetting. The weapons of cataclysm. Past civilizations collapsed under famine, invasion, plague. Our age carries another danger. Weapons capable of annihilating not only nations but the species itself. Nuclear arsenals, biotechnologies, artificial intelligence without restraint. No prior civilization has held such power. If cycles repeat, ours may end not in slow decline but in sudden cataclysm of our own making. The signs of return. The flood myth reminds us. Water rises. Today seas creep upward again, swallowing coasts, threatening cities. The fire myth reminds us skies blaze. Today firestorms and droughts spread across continents. The signs are not only symbolic, they are literal. The very catastrophes that erased earlier ages are returning in ours. The cycle whispers, the wheel turns again. The amnesia of the present. Even as signs multiply, many remain blind. Like civilizations before, we believe ourselves eternal. We tell ourselves stories of progress, imagining that technology alone will save us. We live in amnesia of history's cycles, convinced collapse is for others, not us. This is the deepest danger, not catastrophe itself, but forgetfulness. Catastrophe may be survived if prepared for, but amnesia ensures unpreparedness. The veil blinds us, even as the storm gathers. The fragments we carry. Yet all is not despair. For just as survivors of past cycles carried fragments, myths, symbols, dreams, we too may carry fragments forward. Our myths of apocalypse may prepare us. Our fascination with ancient ruins may remind us. Our science may allow preservation across collapse if used wisely. We are the inheritors of memory, even if fractured. The choice is whether we will carry it forward consciously, or let it be scattered again. The threshold moment. Perhaps every civilization reaches a threshold moment. The point where awareness of the cycle allows transcendence. The point where remembering becomes possible, where the veil thins enough to glimpse continuity. Perhaps we are at that moment now. The very act of asking where do we stand may be the beginning of breaking the cycle. Awareness is the seed of change. The mirror of Sumer. Sumer, the first civilization we can read, emerged after a flood. They built upon fragments, remembered in part, forgotten in part. They reached brilliance, then collapsed. We are Sumer again, brilliant, fragile, haunted by amnesia. But unlike Sumer, we have the fragments of many civilizations at once. We can study Egypt, Rome, Maya, Indus. We can see the cycle in broad perspective. The question is whether that perspective will matter. Preparing for what comes. If collapse comes, the task is not to preserve everything. That is impossible. The task is to preserve what matters most. Wisdom, memory, continuity. To encode in durable forms, to carry through catastrophe the seeds of renewal. The ancients used stone, myth, and symbol. We may use digital archives, but we must also embed memory in culture, in psyche, in forms that survive when machines fail. For if the cycle returns, and it will, the survivors will need fragments to rebuild. What we choose to preserve will shape the next age. Where we stand now. So, where are we? We are at the height of flourishing, yet trembling at the edge of collapse. We are Rome at its peak, Egypt at its golden age, Maya before the drought. We are brilliant and blind, wise and forgetful, heirs of fragments and creators of amnesia. The cycle returns, the flood rises, the fire waits, the veil thickens. But we are not helpless. To see the cycle is to step outside it, if only slightly. To remember is to resist amnesia. To preserve consciously is to prepare the way for rebirth. Transition toward choice. We have mirrored the cycle upon ourselves. We see the warning. The question now is, what do we do with it? Do we repeat collapsing into amnesia, or do we break the loop, carrying memory forward deliberately? The next part of our journey will face this directly. The possibility of breaking the cycle, of choosing consciously, of shaping history rather than being shaped by it. For history is not only mirror, it can also be teacher. The question is whether we will learn. We have walked through the ruins of forgotten civilizations. We have seen how memory collapses into myth, how symbols survive when libraries burn, how DNA and psyche bear scars of catastrophe. We have acknowledged the veil of forgetting, and we have dared to ask, where do we stand now? The answer is unsettling. We stand at a threshold, suspended between flourishing and collapse. The cycle is poised to repeat. Flood and fire loom, not only as metaphors, but as ecological and geopolitical realities. Yet within this precarious moment lies a rare possibility, the chance to break the loop. This part of our journey is not about what was, but about what could be. For if history is mirror, it is not prison. The spiral allows for return, but also for transcendence. We are invited now to ask, can we choose differently? Can we remember, preserve, and evolve rather than collapse, forget, and repeat? The nature of the loop, the cycle of civilizations is clear. Rise, flourish, collapse, forget, rebuild. Why does it persist? Because forgetting resets the game. Each age loses the wisdom of the last, repeating errors blindly. Catastrophe clears the field, but it also erases the library. The loop persists because amnesia is built into it. Memory fragments, myth abstracts, symbols lose context. Survivors inherit only shards. But today, for the first time, we have global memory. Digital archives, interconnected networks, libraries accessible worldwide. We carry knowledge in forms unimaginable to Sumer, Egypt, or Rome. If the loop repeats, it may not be for lack of memory, but for lack of will. The illusion of powerlessness. One reason civilizations collapse is the illusion of inevitability. People believe their age eternal until the moment it cracks. Then, in the shock, they believe nothing could have been done. But this is illusion. Collapse is rarely instant. Warning signs appear decades in advance. Ecological strain, inequality, corruption, overreach. We see these now. We feel them. To pretend collapse is impossible is blindness. To pretend collapse is inevitable is despair. Both attitudes trap us in the loop. The truth is subtler. Collapse is possible, but not inevitable. It is shaped by choices. The loop can bend. The archetype of choice. Myth teaches us that at the center of every cycle lies a choice. Gilgamesh, after failing to gain immortality, chooses wisdom instead. Noah chooses to build the ark, carrying life forward. Prometheus chooses to steal fire despite punishment. Inanna chooses to descend into the underworld, and in so doing returns transformed. The archetype is clear. Catastrophe is not avoided, but what survives catastrophe depends on choice. Heroes are those who act consciously in the face of inevitability, who carry fragments across the flood. So too with civilizations. Collapse may come, but whether we collapse into amnesia or carry knowledge forward depends on choice. The tools we possess. We are not powerless, we hold tools no past age possessed. Global archives. Knowledge preserved in multiple forms, print, digital, distributed across continents. Even if one center falls, another may survive. Scientific awareness. We understand climate cycles, geology, astronomy. We can predict disasters with precision our ancestors could not. Genetic insight. We can map DNA, preserving biological memory as well as cultural. Symbolic literacy. We are rediscovering the importance of archetypes and myths, bridging psychology with history. Global connectivity. For the first time, the entire planet can communicate. Memory is not regional but planetary. These tools give us potential to break the loop, not by preventing collapse entirely, but by preserving memory across it, consciously. What breaking the loop means. Breaking the loop does not mean avoiding catastrophe forever. Floods, earthquakes, fires, they are part of Earth's rhythm. But breaking the loop means preventing amnesia. It means carrying forward wisdom so that each age does not begin as if from nothing. It means preserving ecological knowledge so survivors rebuild sustainably, preserving myths and symbols so meaning is not lost, preserving science and technology in durable, low-tech formats that can survive collapse, preserving awareness of the cycle itself so future generations recognize the pattern. Breaking the loop means refusing to let catastrophe erase continuity. It means transforming the cycle from blind repetition into spiral evolution. The resistance of forgetting, but forgetting will resist. Power resists preservation. Elites profit from control of knowledge. Political powers suppress inconvenient truths. Even now, archives are destroyed in war, libraries gutted, cultures silenced. The veil is still woven by human hand. To break the loop requires not only technology but courage. The courage to preserve what is threatened, to speak what is forbidden, to protect memory against erasure. The individual's role. It may seem overwhelming, but breaking the loop begins at the individual level. Each person is a carrier of memory. Each dream, each story, each ritual is a fragment. To tell the story, to write it, to pass it on, these are acts of resistance. The great collapses of history were survived by communities who carried fragments. Monks copying texts by candlelight, griots reciting oral histories, families preserving myths by the fire. Today, each of us can be such a carrier, choosing to remember, choosing to transmit. The archetype of the ark. The ark is the ultimate symbol of breaking the loop. In flood myths worldwide, a vessel preserves seeds, animals, stories, fragments of life. The ark is not meant to stop the flood. It is meant to carry memory through it. Today, we must build new arks, not of wood and pitch, but of culture and consciousness. Digital arks, symbolic arks, genetic arks, psychological arks. The form matters less than the function, to preserve continuity across catastrophe. Every act of preservation, every archive, every retelling of myth, every dream recorded, every ritual enacted, they are all planks in the arc of humanity. The Sumerian lesson. Sumer teaches us both the fragility and resilience of memory. They inherited fragments from before the flood. They carried them into clay tablets, myths, symbols. Even after their collapse, fragments survived, waiting millennia to be read again. We too may collapse, but if we preserve consciously, fragments will survive, awaiting rediscovery. Perhaps the future will read our tablets, digital or stone, and remember. Perhaps the future will break the loop because we chose to act. The present is crucible. This moment is crucible. Never before has humanity been so powerful, so interconnected, so aware of cycles. Never before has forgetting been so tempting, so easy, buried in distraction, drowned in data, silenced by noise. The present is choice. Do we allow amnesia to return, repeating the cycle, or do we act consciously, breaking the loop? The call to awareness. Breaking the loop begins with awareness. To see the cycle is to weaken it. To name the veil is to thin it. To remember even fragments is to resist amnesia. This is why we tell these stories, why we trace myths and monuments, why we meditate on symbols and dreams. Not to indulge in nostalgia, but to preserve awareness. Awareness is arc, toward the final echo. We are nearing the end of this journey. We have seen the fracture in reality, the echoes in stone, the scars in memory, the synthesis of cycles. Now we face the ultimate question. Not what was, but what will be. History is mirror, but it need not be prison. The cycle is real, but it need not enslave us. The choice of the present is whether we allow ourselves to drown in forgetting, or to awaken into continuity. The spiral awaits. Will we repeat blindly, or will we rise? The journey nears its end. We have walked the broken pathways of forgotten civilizations, traced myths that whisper of floods and fires, uncovered scars etched into DNA, and followed symbols into the shadowed depths of the psyche. We have seen how history is not line but spiral, not ascent but cycle. We have stood before the veil of forgetting, and we have dared to ask whether the loop can be broken. Now at the close we must release the analysis and return to poetry. For what remains is not argument but echo, an echo that resounds across the cosmos, a final reminder of what it means to be human in the face of eternity. The silence between the stars. Step outside on a clear night, far from the glow of cities. Look upward. You're staring into infinity. Stars glimmer like fragments of a shattered mirror. Galaxies swirl like spirals of memory. Between them lies darkness, vast and inscrutable. This is the stage upon which the human story unfolds. Against the immensity of the cosmos, our civilizations are brief sparks. Sumer, Egypt, Rome, the modern age, each is a firefly's flash against the endless night. Yet each flash carries meaning. Each illuminates for an instant the mystery of being. The silence between the stars is not emptiness. It is the great archive. It is the library of eternity. And perhaps, just perhaps, when we align our monuments to Orion, when we encode myths of floods and serpents, when we dream of fire and ruins, we are whispering back to that silence, leaving echoes that stretch beyond collapse. The fragility of memory. What is memory, after all? A vibration in neurons, a mark on clay, a glyph carved into stone, a dream that lingers at dawn. Memory is fragile, and yet memory is everything. Without memory, identity dissolves. Without memory, civilizations collapse into repetition. Without memory, humanity itself is adrift. The fragility of memory is why the cycle repeats. But fragility is not failure, it is beauty. For every act of remembering is heroic. Every myth carried forward, every story retold, every stone aligned to a star is defiance against forgetting. Humanity is fragile, yes, but humanity remembers again and again against all odds. The cosmic spiral. We have spoken of cycles as prison, but cycles are also teachers. They show us that nothing is final. Collapse is not end but transformation. Death is not silence but seed. Think of the spiral galaxy, arms circling endlessly yet never returning to the exact same place. This is the spiral of history. We repeat, but we evolve. We forget, but we carry fragments. We collapse, but we rise again. The final echo is this. The spiral does not trap us. It carries us. Even amnesia cannot erase everything. Even catastrophe cannot extinguish all. The spiral ensures continuity, however fractured. The final echo is not despair. It is resilience. The role of the listener. You listening now are part of this echo. You are the archive. These words pass through your mind, and in doing so they leave imprint. Perhaps you will forget details, but not essence. Perhaps you will dream tonight of floods or serpents or ruins, and you will recognize them not as fantasy but as memory. The role of the listener is vital, for civilizations are not preserved by stones alone, nor by books, nor by digital servers. They are preserved by consciousness, by the choice to remember. If you remember even a fragment, you carry it forward. You become arc, the smallness and the vastness. It is humbling to recognize how small we are. Civilizations rise and fall in mere thousands of years, while stars burn for billions. Our entire species is younger than the light travelling now from distant galaxies. Against such immensity, our striving seems fragile, even futile, and yet it is precisely our smallness that makes us meaningful. The cosmos is vast, but only through consciousness can it be known. Through us, the universe contemplates itself. Through our myths, the silence is given voice. Through our memory, the spiral becomes story. We are small, yes, but smallness is the aperture through which eternity sees itself. The final choice. At the threshold of endings, the question remains, what will we do? Will we collapse into amnesia once more, repeating the loop blindly, or will we remember, preserve, and carry forward? The choice is collective, but it is also individual. Every story told, Every memory preserved, every dream recorded, every symbol honoured. These are choices. Each is a plank in the arc. Each is an act of defiance against forgetting. Breaking the loop may not mean preventing catastrophe, but it may mean carrying wisdom through it. It may mean ensuring that the next stage begins not in darkness, but with light enough to see. The poetics of return, and so the story circles back. To the stones at Baalbek, impossibly vast. To the serpent coiled on Sumerian seals. To the pyramids aligned with Orion. To the myths of floods told in every tongue. To the dreams that replay ruins and fire. These are not relics of the past. They are echoes reverberating still, waiting for us to listen. They are invitations to remember, to connect, to awaken. The final echo is not in the stones or the myths. It is in you. A meditation in closing. Close your eyes. Imagine the earth from space, a blue spiral of oceans and clouds fragile against the black. Imagine the millions of civilizations that may have risen and fallen on other worlds, leaving only echoes in starlight. Imagine our own world cycling through ages yet always rising again. Now imagine silence, not emptiness but fullness, a silence that holds all echoes, all fragments, all dreams. In that silence hear the whisper. You're not first, you're not last. You're the echo of echoes, the dream of dreams, the fragment of fragments, and still you matter. For memory is fragile, but you are its vessel. Remember, and you break the loop. Forget, and you repeat. The choice is yours. The final echo. The cuneiform tablets crumble. The pyramids erode, the servers will one day fail, but the echo remains. The cosmos itself is memory, and we are part of it. The final echo is this. We are both small and vast, both fragile and eternal, both forgetful and remembering. The cycle may repeat, but consciousness is the key. Awareness is the arc. Memory is the bridge. And so, the story does not end. It cannot. It spirals onward, into your dreams, into your choices, into the future waiting beyond the veil. The final echo belongs to you.